I don't know how you were walking around afterwards. Imagine if they did that in Fortnite or Half-Life or something. I mean, they do it in Fortnite. And it's dumb. It's dumb. Getting rezzed is dumb. That's not how life works. I mean, I guess, yeah. Maybe. Not really, though. Usually, if you get shot 13 times in battle or whatever, you don't get, like, picked up and go back to work, soldier. That's not how that works. It's one of the reasons why Tarkov almost kicked you in the balls. You know what I'm saying? If they had actually connected the worlds and done the voice chat the right way, Tarkov would have kicked you in your fucking nuts. Because they got it a little better than you with that. Like, you get shot 13 fucking times, you're not getting picked up by, you're not going to be, you're not going to get to go practice with the homies until you're back up 5 seconds later. That's not how life works. It shouldn't work if it does, you know? I don't like the fucking Nox system.
The asteroid
Sick of it robbing me of my actual victories, because it's like, what? Like, I won that fight. I didn't have to fire more than 4 more rounds. I had that fight. I gave him the chance. Man, whatever. Your friend's up and around butt fucking you again every, like, 2 seconds, like 5 seconds later, after I laid him out on the floor. So it wasn't just like I won the 2v1, it was like I won the 3v1. You know what I'm saying? Because he was rezzed. It's so stupid. Those kind of odds, was I expected to win? I'm done. You're not watching fucking Alone in Tokyo. I think we can all admit that. Why is it that you need to show up there like that and prove to the world how fucking small your fucking brain is? If it causes me to despair. Like, what? Well, small brain gonna small brain. I can't do anything about that. God damn it, man. The harassment, the constant harassment is like... Rats on the zero profit, boys. I hope it was worth farming the 0.5x for 20 hours. Fucking pieces of shit. I'm still a winner. I'll have a bigger base by tomorrow. Raids are subjective. It's all about how you handle them, you know? I haven't had a raid on this server in a long time. Better watch out for Nori. It keeps making me laugh. It's so goddamn dumb. Better watch out for Nori. No. No. Nori has shown the world. I don't need to watch out for him. Watch out for Nori. Stabbed you in the back. Yeah, it's Rust. They're gonna stab you in the back. That's the pieces of shit that play this game. It's the least honorable game in existence.
To make up stuff.
As you can see.
Ooh, this gets interesting. There's Sharon Churcher. Allegations go in both directions here.
Oh man, we better go farm large oil and sulfur for 26 hours so we can bang that solo for zero profit, guys. I mean, reality and them, they don't mix often, you know? It's tragic, kind of. You watch a truly dumb person try to function, you're like,
What's this? Without waiver of Googling this, Maxwell responds as the following. Plaintiff's records disclose that she allegedly had been sexually assaulted as a child by a family friend. And she had been a sexual slave in the capacity of a young teacher, or a young teenager.
I don't want to hear about this anymore. It's depressing me. What happened to him? Was he killed? Yeah.
times when our nation
Haha, you can't get 2 of the 50 states' votes. I wonder how well that'll go for you.
is so divided. The only thing that can bring us all together is kicking one.
Is kicking Trump in the balls until he's like actually falls down instead of remorphing like some kind of terrible terramorph and plaguing the world with his stupidity further, like all his little cronies.
The 2 presidential candidates off the ballot. Yes, that'll do it. Now,
Oh man, we've never had that before. 2 states just straight up refuse to vote for you. That's oof. That's ouchies.
The asteroid is depleted.
I'll go with that direction, I guess. It's fun to rebuild, frankly. I didn't think it would be that fast. But it happens like that sometimes. They had their eyes on me. They were planning it. They flew by so many goddamn times. They're so dumb.
God bless America.
Ah, man, he lost. He lost this. He lost. It's actually the confirmation we needed. He lost. He's out of here. The Republicans won't have rule again for 30 years or something like that.
a few
It's
months ago,
beautiful. It's like, see the smile on his face?
I told you that there was
Do you see it?
a possibility that
He takes great pleasure in this, and so do I. The Republicans are the fuck out of here for like 30 years. They're never going to get back in. They'll have to reform the party first. It's actually awesome. They fucked up so bad here. It's the death of the Republican Party, guys. Yeah! Yeah! The death of the Republican Party. Yes!
because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And now one state has actually booted him from the ballot.
The 2 states have booted him, and it'll be 50 in the end.
In 3 years to the
Why
day
did you guys back that stupid, illiterate asshole? Jesus Christ. Because he had money? That's always a good reason. Why did you guys back that fucking criminal? Jesus Christ, man. What did you say Biden did, right? His son was a drug addict and he tried to hide it or whatever, and he liked to sniff girls' hair? Trump has 200 felonies. Which do you think is worse? Sniffing a girl's hair and, like, trying to hide your son being a fucking drugged out felon? Or 200 felonies, like 200 confirmed felonies, like as in 200, they're prosecuting him for 200 felonies. Like, which one's worse? Gee, I think I'll take the hair sniffing. He seemed to have really kind of set us back with anybody who isn't Russia and China. Really badly.
Hence this infamous tweet announcing a mass protest. Be there, it will be wild. The Colorado Supreme Court.
Oh no, you incited a insurrection. It wasn't a resurrection, it was the death of your career. It was not a resurrection, it was the surrection. It was the dissection of your career into half of what it was. Now it's dead. They've confirmed it. They'll die before they'll let a crazy criminal like you run in the White House anymore. Now they're going to be all, you done fucked it up for all the criminals in the Republican Party who have occupied that seat in the last like 50 years. We got the 9/11 murderer. We have the Watergate liar. We've got the, you know, the COVID bungler. And now we've got the Mr. 200 felonies. And so what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? Trump ruined the presidency for criminals. We're never going to have a criminal again. You want to talk about oversight of software developers? That won't ever happen. But what will happen is oversight of the presidency. There's never going to be a fucking Republican criminal in the president. Well, not my. But anyways, like, you know, there's never going to be another Republican criminal in power again. It's awesome. He fucked it up. He had an open season, open border. He just had like no limits. He could take a shit in Netanyahu's drink and nobody would care, right? How did he put it? It was I could cap somebody on Fifth Avenue and still get the presidency. And no, it turns out you couldn't, could you? No. That braggadocio and all that? No. That's not what's going to happen here. 200 fucking confirmed felonies is what happened here. 2 states kicking you off the ballot, which cuts your chances by at least 2/50ths. 2/50ths, right? Who else in the fucking union has some sense? Is it just Colorado and Maine? Because I don't think so. I think there's other people who might have sense in this union. I love laughing at the fucking Republican criminals getting arrested. Think of every Republican of the last 50 years. How many lawsuits did Republican presidents, right? How many Republican how many lawsuits have been filed on Republican presidents in the last 50 years? You might hate us for being bleeding heart liberals and liking our gays and liking our unified military and being like, you know, sort of like peaceful overseas and not pushing the arms race and all this stuff, right? You have your reasons to hate us, right? We hate you because you're full-blown criminals most of the time. I'll take being on The View over over 200 felonies, honestly. Right? How many lawsuits have been filed on Republican presidents in the last 50 years? It's actually kind of a funny question. Oh no, Trump's 3,500 lawsuits, and this is USA Today. I thought it was just 200. No, it's 3,500. Oh no, 3,500 lawsuits. We all know how easy it is to get out of one lawsuit. Let's make sure it's 3,500 and really sink the deal. Here's the deal. Here you can hear him saying, here's the deal. I will somehow skirt around 3,500 lawsuits. Dr. Evil. No.
Direction. As a result, the court ruled that Trump cannot be listed on the Republican.
No, you're not. Look at the smile on his face because he's like, yeah, you stupid jackass. You've been flaunting our fucking reputation, the destruction of our country's reputation in our face for 5 fucking years. And no, we won't. No. We'll straight vote you off the ballot if it takes. I've watched you destroy my country for too long. I won't watch you do it again. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my solution is to a Republican presidency in the next 10 years, but it's probably pretty drastic. I'll begin the process of worrying about my passport again this spring, and I'll look into expatriation, which is what I always do when a Republican criminal takes power. But most days they're like, stick around, right? This time around, I'm not so sure. I always felt like I kind of didn't mean it, you know? This time around, I kind of do. I don't want to see Republican criminals in power ever again.
Opens up a big can of worms for the embattled.
From confirmed Watergate. I mean, we can't confirm 9/11, but I mean, it's so unconfirmed 9/11. We can confirm the bungling of COVID. And, I mean, yeah, the bank crisis was really bad. But not 3,000 lawsuits bad. You know? The banking crisis sucked. But, I mean, one could argue that was what happened after 9/11. That was what was going to happen after what you did in 9/11.
U.S. Supreme Court. Will it overrule the Colorado Supreme Court? How will it structure its decision?
I should do like 3 weeks of straight anti-Republican propaganda on my channel, because I can do that. It's my channel. It's whatever the fuck I want. I'll do whatever the fuck I want. You know what I'm saying? Like Bam Margera. I'll do whatever the fuck I want. And I should for like 3 weeks. I know it'll piss off all the little Eichmanns that hang out. For 3 weeks, I'll just do factual background on how many lawsuits Trump is actually facing and how bad it actually is. It'd actually be kind of funny. You know? Actually, like illustrate how bad it is, you know?
Might this set for other states? And of course, what's also going on with Michigan and Maine as Trump gets kicked off another ballot? Today we're going to talk about the ramifications of this decision. But first, what in the world just happened in Colorado? Well, in October, a group of Colorado electors eligible to vote in the Republican presidential primary, including both registered Republican and unaffiliated voters, filed a petition in the district court for the county of Denver, asking the court to rule that the former President Trump may not appear on the Colorado Republican presidential primary ballot. The plaintiffs asserted that he, quote, wasn't eligible under Section 3 because he engaged in insurrection on January.
Engaged in an insurrection. They toss it so offhandedly. They're like, he engaged in insurrection, remember? It's fine. It's fine. They just, at this point, it's just a reality. That's the reality that he brought to this country. Is though he kind of engaged in an insurrection that one time. That's the America that we let this become. It's like we kind of offhandedly mention in the press now that he kind of incited an insurrection, you know? Like, what happened here?
2021, after swearing an oath as president to support the U.S. Constitution. The district court conducted a 5-day trial and then found by clear and convincing evidence that Trump engaged in an insurrection as those terms are used in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. However, the district court concluded Section 3 does not apply to the president because the presidency is not in office and therefore the president is not an officer of the United States. The plaintiffs appealed and the Colorado Supreme Court partially overturned the district court decision, finding that Trump committed insurrection and that he was an officer of the United States. The first issue was whether the state had jurisdiction to decide whether a presidential candidate had participated in an insurrection and was therefore disqualified from the ballot. Now, you might legitimately wonder why in the world we would want 50 different standards for how an election is administered. Well, take that up with the Founding Fathers. Since the Constitution delegates to the states the authority to prescribe the times, places, and manner of holding congressional elections, the states retain the power to regulate their own elections. Now, I'm not going to do a deep dive into the applicable Colorado statutes because we have a lot of material related to the federal Constitution, and the Supreme Court's not going to care that much about the actual Colorado election law issues here. So let's move on to the text of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment
Go
to the Federal
Colorado.
Constitution, which reads, quote, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Section 3 was added to the Constitution after the Civil War, when Northern Republicans were outraged at the prospect of Southerners who seceded from the Union returning to hold positions of power in the same government that they tried to destroy. This was their way of saying that if you ever participated in an insurrection in this country, you aren't eligible to serve as an officer of the United States. But they didn't define all the terms used in Section 3, so the court had to do it for them. So the Colorado courts first had to determine whether Trump had participated in an insurrection. When the 14th Amendment was ratified, there was an assumption that everyone knew what an insurrection looked like because there had just been a civil war. It seems that Congress would block anyone that it felt had participated in the Confederacy. But in the absence of a civil war, what are we to do? Well, the Colorado Supreme Court started with the dictionary definition of the word insurrection. Merriam-Webster says it's an act or instance of revolting against civil or political authority or against an established government, or an act or instance of rising up physically. And the court agreed that insurrection, for purposes of Section 3, has to include a concerted and public use of force or threat of force by a group of people to hinder or prevent the U.S. government from taking the actions necessary to accomplish a peaceful transition of power in this country. And the Colorado courts concluded that whatever definition you're using, it would apply in this scenario. Right after January 6th, Republicans quickly recognized that what had happened met the general definition of insurrection, just like their Reconstruction-era ancestors. Here's Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on January 7th, 2021, using the same definition as the Colorado court.
Violent insurrection. Purpose, trying prevent peaceful transfer of power after a legitimately certified election. Non-administrative.
Legitimately
Trump's lawyers
certified.
declined to offer a definition of insurrection, instead
Stupid
arguing
turtle
that
head.
an insurrection is more than a riot, but less than a rebellion. The court agreed that, quote, an insurrection falls along a spectrum of related conduct, but no authority supports the position taken by President Trump's counsel in oral argument that insurrectionary conduct must involve a particular length of time or geographic location. The bottom line is that there has to be a group of people who use violence in a good way, and violence also has to be directed towards achieving some kind of public purpose. A private act or even a conspiracy to commit a crime doesn't rise to the level of insurrection, and the required force or threat of force doesn't require bloodshed, nor does it require those involved to be highly organized at the insurrection's inception. And you can see how this definition might include Trump's actions before and during January 6th.
Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us, and if he doesn't,
We'll hang
it
him.
will be a sad day for our country.
Vince Cave, we're gonna drag through the streets. You politicians are gonna get drugged through the streets.
And
Yep.
during the events of January 6th, the
I hope
said,
so.
quote, it is undisputed that a large...
He can, he can't incite a insurrection. I can try and incite an insurrection. I can do that. I'm just a citizen. He's the president, right? I could be like, yeah, drag the politicians out by their fucking clothes. Get him out of here. I totally agree with him. Fuck him. Fuck those American traitors. Straight up. I don't care if he's an alt-right idiot or not. He's right.
The Oath Keepers stored a cache of weapons for a QRF, or quick reaction force, that would
Drag
respond
those
to the
politicians
Capitol
out by
bomb.
their worthless
President
asses.
Trump were to, quote, declare
Absolutely.
insurrection and to call us up as the militia.
Many of the rioters also stole objects from the building. And even
Worthless piece of
from
shit
the police,
alt-right.
including that a rod shield,
Destroying the
None of them
world.
considered whether Trump really engaged
You're the one who
in
put him
insurrection
there.
for purposes of Section 3.
You want to know why they call it the alt-right? That's what was left after Trump. It's the alternative to the madness. Alt-right is what's left after Trump, because how do you think Trump got in power in the first place? The alt-right's what's left afterwards. Oh.
Wasn't with the mob when they entered the Capitol building. There wasn't really much precedent, so the court looked at treason cases. In 1807, Chief Justice Marshall explained
Treason
that, quote,
cases.
all those who form any part, however minute or however remote,
Look at what.
from
Look
the
at.
scene of
Okay.
action and
Look at the. What's the word that the stupid talking heads use? It's like. Look at the byplay here. Look at the what's the word they always use? The fucking suit dummies. They always say this shit. Listen to the narrative that this man has brought to this country, right? It's almost like Rachel Maddow rage. It's like, look at the narrative that this criminal has turned this country into. We have to talk about inciting treason in our daily news, you know? It's like, oh God, what'd you do to us? Oof. It's like that Peter Griffin joke where he falls and he hurts his leg and he's like, for like 10 minutes. Do you guys remember that? I do. For like 10 minutes, they just let him. They let Todd McFarlane or whatever his name is, Seth MacFarlane or whatever. They just let him. They just let him go. On international Fox television for like 3.5 minutes. He's just like, oh, it hurts so bad. And it reminds me of that. That's like what the last 5 years of media cycle after Trump was. It's like, every day it's like, it's like, it's that oof sound, but it's after you like, you bang your fucking shin into like a walnut like fucking knob on a chair or something like that, and you're like, oh, that smarts, oh, fucking hurts, it hurts, right? It's like that, but that's what our media cycle, that's the narrative that Trump has engendered in us, is this talk of treason and 3,500 felonies and insurrection. These are not things that I want out of an American president. I'm just saying, sooner or later, the logic has to be pragmatic. And the alt-right is the alt-right now, because they're alt-right now after what's left, you know.
actually leagued in the general conspiracy are to be considered traitors.
They'll be alt-right.
The Colorado court held that
They'll be alt-right
engaging in
after all.
overt acts and
They'll be okay. They'll be alt-right, you know. They'll be alt-right after that. You know, after some time, they'll be alt-right. They'll be alt-right in the end.
Furthering the common unlawful purpose, and concluded that Trump engaged in.
Included that he's a
The
criminal.
court notes that Trump laid the groundwork as early as August of 2020, when he said the election would be rigged against him. In September, he refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power. The court emphasized that Trump and his supporters were united in the purpose of stopping Congress from certifying the election. Quote, the mob was coordinated and demonstrated a unity of purpose. They marched through the Capitol building, chanting in a manner that made clear that they were seeking to inflict violence against members of Congress and Vice President Pence. And upon breaching the Capitol, the mob immediately pursued its intended target, the certification of the presidential election, and reached the House and Senate chambers within minutes of entering the building. The mob achieved its objective, at least temporarily. Quote, this breach caused both the House and Senate to adjourn, halting the electoral certification process. In addition, much of the mob's ire, which included threats of physical violence, was directed at Vice President Pence, who, in his role as president of the Senate, was constitutionally tasked with carrying out the electoral count. In other words, the mob wasn't on a tourist trip taking selfies, as some Republicans recently insisted. They wanted to stop the peaceful transfer of power. Now, if you ever get kicked off a ballot, then you'll need a good lawyer.
If you ever
want
get
a
kicked
great
off a
lawyer, my
ballot.
firm, the Eagle team can help.
You'll need a good lawyer. Listen to the narrative that he's fostered in our national conversation. If you've been restricted from a ballot, you might need a lawyer. Nah.
Sexual harassment or are dealing with Social Security or workers' comp issues, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney who can. It's so important to talk to an attorney right away so you don't lose your chance for a full recovery and maximize your options. So just click on the link in the description for a free consultation with my team.
Fucking criminal.
Because you don't just need a legal team.
You're gonna need a good. You don't need a criminal lawyer. You need a criminal lawyer.
The Colorado Supreme Court agreed with the district court that Trump was no innocent bystander in these events. He recruited, quote, Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and the three.
Oh, good. We like those people. Oh, good. QAnon. Yay, terrorists and Proud Boys. Yay. Terrorists and Proud Boys for everyone. We really like that stuff.
Was that when Congress met to certify the election results on January 6th, Vice President Pence could reject the true electors who voted for President Biden and certify.
Oh, look, I have my entire TC back already.
Or he could return the slates to the states for proceedings.
I mean,
now the Colorado Supreme Court overturned the lower court's decision that the president is not an officer of the United States. Now, the district court concluded that the presidency is not an office, civil, or military under the United States for two reasons. First, the court noted that the presidency is not specifically mentioned in Section 3, though senators, representatives, and presidential electors are. The court found it unlikely that the presidency would be included in the catch-all of any office, civil, or military. Second, the court found it compelling that an earlier draft of the section specifically included the presidency, suggesting that the drafters intended to omit the presidency in the version that it passed. But the state Supreme Court concluded that the specifics of that change don't prove that there wasn't an intent to exclude the presidency from the covered offices. This part of the majority opinion focuses on the spirit of the law rather than the letter, because it concludes that it would have been logically absurd for Section 3's drafter to exclude the president from the list of people who shouldn't be allowed to hold elected office if they participated in insurrection. Quote, the drafters of Section 3 were motivated by a sense of betrayal, that is, by the existence of a broken oath, not by the type of officer who broke it. All of us understand the meaning of the third section, Senator John Sherman stated. It includes those men who have once taken an oath of office to support the Constitution of the United States and have violated that oath in spirit by taking up arms against the government of the United States are to be deprived for a time at least of holding office. The majority opinion also makes a textual argument by finding that, quote, the Constitution refers to the presidency as an officer 25 times. The court also notes that the Constitution refers to the presidency as an office under the United States in several contexts that seem to support the conclusion that the presidency is such an office. And as another example, they cite the impeachment clause, which reads that Congress can impose, as a consequence of impeachment, a disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. If the presidency is not an office under the United States, then anyone impeached, including the president, could nonetheless go on to serve as president. This reading is nonsensical, as recent impeachments demonstrate. The court's point is that it would have been weird if the impeachment proceedings against Trump and Bill Clinton would have resulted in their removal from office and disqualification to hold any future office, except for the presidency. The Colorado court concluded that, quote, President Trump undertook all of these actions to aid and further a common unlawful purpose that he himself conceived and set in motion, prevent Congress from certifying the 2020 presidential election, and stop the peaceful transfer of power. The court held that Trump is barred from the primary ballot, although that decision is stayed through the Supreme Court's review. Now, all 7 of the Colorado justices were Democrats, and the result was 4 votes to 3. The 3 dissenting justices also raised substantive issues that may get the attention of the Supreme Court. Some of the dissenting justices said that the court didn't give Trump enough due process. Now, what constitutes sufficient due process to disqualify someone from the ballot? That's an open question. Should the person have the same safeguards they would in the criminal trial? Or should the process be more like a civil case? We don't really know. Here, in this particular case, there was a 5-day trial in the district court where both sides presented testimony, and the court came to a conclusion. Trump was represented and filed briefs outlining his position. The parties called witnesses, and many third parties filed supplemental amicus briefs to help the court decide. But on the other hand, the hearing lacked discovery. Neither side could subpoena documents or compel witnesses, and it was decided by a judge rather than a jury. The dissenting justices also said that maybe there should be an independent procedure, something akin to a criminal trial, before a court rules that a person can't appear on the ballot. The disqualification clause is frustratingly silent on whether there must be an independent proceeding, so the question is whether Section 3 is really self-executing. Now, a law is self-executing if it is immediately effective without further action, legislation, or legal steps. The Supreme Court has never decided this issue, but Chief Justice Solomon Chase opined on it while he was a circuit justice for Virginia. In 1854, Chase was going to preside over the treason trial of Jefferson Davis. Now, that trial never happened because President Andrew Johnson gave him a pardon. But Chase allegedly told Davis's lawyer that he viewed Section 3 as a criminal punishment, and that if Davis was disqualified, he would not face a criminal trial.
Jefferson Davis
Chase decided a case
was the
called
last
Caesar
time this was
Griffin.
pertinent.
Caesar Griffin had been sentenced to a 2-year prison sentence for assault by a state judge who happened to be a former Confederate officer. He argued that the judge was disqualified under Section 3 and that it was self-executing. Justice Chase disagreed. Here he held that the legislation by Congress providing for removal was necessary to give effect to the prohibition of Section 3. And without such legislation, the judge was entitled to continue in his position. Now, remember when I said earlier about 50 states and 50 different rules? Well, the Michigan Supreme Court has ruled that Trump's candidacy was a political question, and Michigan law didn't give the Secretary of State the right to keep him off the ballot. But in Maine, the legislature delegated authority to determine candidate qualifications to the Secretary of State. So, Maine voters filed 3 administrative challenges to Trump's presence on the primary ballot. And the Maine Secretary of State, Shannon Bellows, held a hearing where Trump's lawyers and the challengers argued the merits of disqualification. And Bellows has now ruled that Trump is ineligible to be listed on Maine's primary ballot. Now, the decision was made by the state official rather than a court, but the rationale is pretty similar to Colorado. Trump tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power on January 6th. The riot was an insurrection, and Section 3 bars Trump from office. Bellows relied on the testimony of a historian who said that some, quote, members of Congress believed the presidency was in office when the amendment was being debated, as did contemporaries outside of Congress, including those who sought to keep Jefferson Davis from the presidency. Therefore, Bellows found it, quote, implausible that the drafters of Section 3 chose to exempt the highest office in our government from an amendment designed to keep Confederates from positions of power. Bellows said, quote, I am mindful that no Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I am also mindful, however, that no presidential candidate has ever before engaged in insurrection. The main decision is pitched directly at the Supreme Court's conservative wing, which has ruled that the court must prioritize the normal and ordinary usage of words rather than secret or technical meanings that would not have been known to the ordinary citizens in the generation. And as Bellows notes, that language comes from the District of Columbia versus Heller, where the court held that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to possess firearms independent of service in state militia. Now, it's almost certain that Trump will appeal that decision. So the question is, will the Supreme Court take these cases on? Well, that's pretty likely. While the Supreme Court has just recently turned down Jack Smith's request for hearing the immunity cases directly without waiting for the Court of Appeals, it's hard to picture that the Supreme Court would allow states' courts to have the final word on the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And most commentators are assuming that the court will overturn the rulings and let Trump run for president in one way or another. But the way they do it, it's going to be, of course, very fascinating. But you can also be certain that the court will claim that politics had nothing to do with their reasoning. And you can already see how this case is scrambling the normal political and legal valences that would exist in a case like this, with many Democrats using principles of originalism or textualism to look at the text and original intent of the 14th Amendment to disqualify Trump from the ballot, and also many Republicans explicitly bringing politics into things, saying that we should ignore the textual and original meaning of the 14th Amendment and look to the political ramifications. And constitutional law professor Steve Vladeck has summarized the political and legal ironies that this case brings up on the excellent It's Complicated podcast.
I realize this is a weird argument for a constitutional law professor to make, but these are weird times. I mean, I tweeted this Tuesday night and knew I was going to get in trouble for it and did. But I think you can believe at the same time that President Trump engaged in insurrection and that he ought to be disqualified from ever holding office again, and also believe, given the Republican Party's casual relationship with truth and facts and evidence,
10 mil.
and widespread endorsement of January 6th related and election related conspiracy theories, that it's actually better for our politics if Trump loses having been on the ballot in all 50 states than if he loses having been kept off the ballot in a handful of states by this, maybe correct Asha, but novel application of a constitutional provision that very few people had heard about before 2021. And so, I think what this really is, and I mean, you know this as well as anyone, is, the dirty little secret is that law is not an absolute, right? Law is part of a.
It's a construct
that politics is also part of.
Yep.
And I think that the Supreme Court probably was hoping against hope that they didn't get dragged into this mess, and that maybe the Colorado Supreme Court, like the Minnesota Supreme Court, found a way to not keep Trump off the ballot. And to me, the real headline of what happened on Tuesday is now I think the Supreme Court has to step in against, not wanting to, and in a way in which there's almost no, obvious win, right, for the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's weird times in the world, and politicians are getting doxxed and swatted left and right, all for their political beliefs, which is terrible. Never swat someone. It's a felony. You'll go to jail. But it's possible because so much of your personal data, like your personal address, is online, which is why I use today's sponsor, Incogni. Incogni removes your personal data from online data brokers. They reach out and make sure it's taken down. If these data brokers object, which I've seen, Incogni will take care of that too. It's amazing. Now, I don't know if you've ever Googled yourself, but there are major people search sites out there that probably have your personal contact info too. It might be because of a data hack, but sometimes our friends and family even provide that info voluntarily by clicking on one of those boxes when they sign up for websites or apps. These sites provide in-depth records, including information such as home addresses, contact details, license plate numbers, family members, financial information, and even religious and political beliefs. These sites can expose you to a wide range of dangers, from scams to identity theft to online harassment and stalking. Now, it was very important for me that I not appear on those sites, and Incogni took that information down. And not only does Incogni help with your online personal info being taken down, but it can also stop marketing efforts. I've seen a huge reduction in the amount of spam emails that I get, spam calls, and spam texts. And it's no surprise why I was getting all of this spam. According to the 2022 Annual Data Breach Report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, the number of victims has gone up nearly 41% from 2021. I was constantly getting notified that my information was part of a data breach. So when that happens, Incogni fights for you to have your personal data taken down from data brokers. Believe me, so many people have it, tackling this yourself would be nearly impossible. But that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni fights on your behalf to remove your personal data from data brokers and deals with any objections from their side. All you have to do is create an account and give them approval to work on your behalf. Incogni conducts repeated ongoing removals because even if the brokers remove your data once, they can collect it again and then use it again. Incogni makes sure that your personal information stays off the market for good. And it was fascinating for me to look at my own dashboard and realize that I'm on hundreds of data brokers lists. Here's part of my personal Incogni dashboard. It shows that these 3 sites had data on me that was rated 10 out of 10 on Incogni's sensitivity scale. These brokers had data including my contacts, financial data, and health data. It was terrifying to see exactly how many brokers had my data, but it was really fun to watch Incogni get them to delete that info one by one. So if online privacy is important to you, give Incogni a try. You can click on the link below to get 60% off Incogni when you use the code LegalEagle. So again, to get an exclusive 60% off discount, just click on the link that's on screen or down in the description and use the code LegalEagle. After that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.
See Trump at court. A lot. Oh, you flew out? Why? Why did you fly out? Go back, you worthless piece of shit. You know I did not tell you to fly out. I did not even click the screen. But you fly me out. I don't know why. Something about Alt-Tab, I guess. Don't know why. Really don't know why you fly me out all the time. It drives me crazy, crazy. Every day you do it 8 or 9 times. I don't tell you to do that. I don't double click. I can't see to find this place to save myself. I don't know. I better try and save myself here. Okay, good. No, burn. Go. Go, go. Go, 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 go. 3, 2, 1. Can't touch the fire or I'll die. That's probably enough. I'm gonna go find my way back to that base that I built. I don't know where it is. I'm like way far away from it. No! The fall damage was... Oh my god. Please get up. You're not gonna get up. It's a 1 in 5, but I've not seen a 1 in 5 in the last 400, so you can call that 1 in 5, but I call it 1 in 5,000. It's not 20% now, is it? It's 2%. Don't lie to my face. Oh, damn it. No, I'm back here. Fucking fall damage. Man, every time I jump like 6 feet down, I totally lose 1/7 of my entire life force.
Do I have your attention? No? How about now? It could be just a few seconds of your time to potentially pull one of my favourite pieces of literary analysis out my arse before we get into the Resident Evil of it all. In 1939, J.R.R. Tolkien was invited to give a lecture on fairy tales at St Andrews University. In typical Tolkien fashion, he wrote 41 pages, and you can find his essay on fairy stories easily enough online. I've linked it below. But something he wrote almost a century ago seeped and drizzled into Resident Evil Village in a way which I didn't expect.
What?
Supernatural is a dangerous and difficult word in any of its senses, he said. For it is
Resident
man
Evil
who
Village?
is, in contrast to fairies, supernatural and often of diminutive stature. In this journey to perilous doom, the fairy is natural, far more natural than man. Such is their doom. The road to fairyland is not the road to heaven, nor even to hell, though some have held that it may be led there indirectly by the devil's teat. Tolkien was fascinated with how fairy tales can be interesting because the creatures and magics are natural in their stories. Putting an ordinary person into that environment, like say Wendy in Peter Pan, can be either whimsical or disturbing, depending on how the tone of the story is handled. With Resident Evil 4, that game applied lots of little tactics to present itself as unnatural, to instill a fear of the other in the player, to prey on a crawling, inescapable xenophobia. The warped architecture presenting Los Illuminados as out of time, the fact that we're in an unnamed, unmarked part of Spain prevents a player from finding sure footing in the opening moments. But most importantly of all is the fact that enemies yell and gush a bizarre pidgin Spanish at the player. I commented on my video covering Resi 4 that I found it really interesting that Resident Evil Village was using the English language and American accents, despite the village itself being shrouded in an unmarked Eastern European location. I stand by that, it is interesting, but after 3 full playthroughs, I think I now know why. It's because Resident Evil Village is a fairy tale, and as Tolkien says, a fairy is natural, far more natural than man, such is their doom. Village isn't concerned with translating our fear of the other, because Resident Evil has done that already. It's more interested in twisting our fear of the familiar, making oddities seem so natural. It uses language every player would understand, recognizable imagery, symbolism, structure, and pacing of a fairy tale to make our familiarity crumble. Resident Evil 4 felt like its horror was recent, like it had, just moments before Leon's arrival, turned a thriving community into a brainwashed alien world set up purely for us to battle through. Resident Evil 8's Village feels natural. It shouldn't, but it does. Like it has always existed. Like the snow and the mountains and the trees have groaned and shuddered with years of gothic romance and grim fairy tales reshaping it. The residents understand its seasons, debate the intricacies of its culture, and you feel that familiarity as well once you reach the halfway mark, despite how regularly the game changes its scenarios and settings. It flips epileptically between Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty, and some of the most disturbing horror I've ever had the displeasure to live in, yet somehow it all manifests like one cohesive whole, a gothic fairy tale. But saying all of that, as much as I like this game, hell, I might even love this game, it's not perfect. Especially on a second or third playthrough, the thrill kind of dies. Though lucky for us, I think its flaws are as interesting as its wins. It is worth noting here that this series is notorious for being accidentally brilliant in a lot of ways, be it mechanical limitations or cheesy translations in the past. Whether or not any of the things I'll mark were intentional by the designers is for you to decide. We'll be walking through the full story of the game, so spoilers ahead, analysing it in a literary sense as a fairy tale, but also in a mechanical sense as a horror game. I've also brought along a new tool for this critique, the patented Monty Wisht Stamper, which we'll be using to respond to certain criticisms I fundamentally disagree with.
The whole theme and atmosphere of the game is completely different. If you just showed me the game and you didn't tell me the name of the game, I would have absolutely no idea that it's Resident Evil.
So sit back, relax, and let Mother Monty sing you to sleep. This is a commentary and critique of Resident Evil Village.
Warp drive active. Long ago, a young girl went with her mother to pick berries for her father, who was hard at work. But the forest greeted them with a dark, cold silence, the bushes empty.
Village's opening is very slow, very scripted, but establishes a suitable tone to build from once Ethan gets into the action. By the 10 minutes mark, we haven't even had a hint of monsters or horror. The focus is all on the family Winters and folk tales. Slithering a fairy tale under the Resident Evil moniker is absurd. I think we can all agree that prior to Village, none of us would have scribbled the concept down and mailed it to Capcom with much enthusiasm, like I've been doing annually since 2010. Seriously, Capcom, hurry up and give me a Resident Evil game that takes place entirely in an umbrella-funded university. There's so much potential here, give it to me! So, as a result, this animated piece of folklore that we get, with odd similarities to Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows of all things, can be jarring. It sets up the folktale of the Village of Shadows. A young girl visits 4 beasts, the Bat Lord, the Weaver, the Fish King, and the Iron Steed, before accidentally wronging them and being snatched away by a witch. The music is as fantasy-esque as you could possibly get, reminiscent of Beauty and the Beast's prologue. It tinkles. The fact that our game opens with a fable establishes these motifs to be carried on later, but what's specifically interesting to me is how beautiful it is. The blood, when there is blood, is golden and lively. Despite the blacks and greys, nothing about this opening conveys death to us. It conveys curiosity. As a story, The Village of Shadows toys with classic fairy tale structure. In 1928, the Soviet folklorist and scholar Vladimir Prop highlighted the 8 typical stages of folktales and fables. Stick with me, there is a point to this. First, there's abstentation. Something goes missing or leaves. The girl and her mother leave the father and journey into the forest. Then there's interdiction. A command is given to the main character. The mother tells the girl to stay with her, but we very quickly hit stage 3, violation. Our hero breaks the command with repercussions. She ditches her mother and meets the 4 lords. Then reconnaissance, where the hero seeks information and completes tasks, typically in 3s, 4s, or 7s. The girl meets the 4 lords and collects gifts from them. Then stage 5, villainy. A villain brings about physical harm, either to the hero or a loved one. The witch appears and descends on the little girl, trapping her inside a mirror. Now, it's here that the story finishes, for now, but once you complete the game, you also get to see the end of the tale, where we reach stage 6, mediation. The current hero or a new hero prepares for a showdown with the villain. This is where the father appears to battle the witch. Stage 7, punishment. The villain is defeated and punished. The father burns the witch, not just killing her, but destroying her forest as well. It's when we reach the final stage, wedding, where the hero is rewarded for their actions, that the story weaves away from Prop's 8 conventions. The Village of Shadows doesn't give us this. The father stays behind and dies. The family don't gain anything from the adventure. Now, why is this interesting? Those of you who've played the game likely know already, but Resident Evil Village's story follows Prop's 8 conventions as well, with that one exception. I'll highlight exactly how as we work through the game, but for now, back to the family winters.
We moved here so that she wouldn't have to deal with any of that, remember?
There's nothing wrong with my memory. You're just being paranoid.
People crap on Ethan Winters, but none of the original reviews of Resi 7 or 8 ever commented on how much these games fumble Mia. Purely due to her presentation, she is up there with Steve Burnside as one of the most unlikable characters in Resi history.
My name's Steve.
Most of this is because of Resident Evil 7's presentation. Mia doesn't get enough time to breathe as a regular human person before she chops Ethan's arm off, tries to claw his eyes out, reveals that she's been lying to him this whole time, and of course, she stands to this day as a symbol of the moment when Resident Evil 7 went from absolutely fantastic to confusing and bland when it gave us our only player choice. After all of that, Village then gives us a snappy, curt, insensitive, and somewhat callous version of Mia in our opening minutes. Oh, sure, it's actually Miranda pretending to be her, but the player doesn't know that. She casts a long shadow over the game's story because it's strongly hinted that she's keeping even more secrets from Ethan, even after escaping the Baker estate. And she even smacks a piping hot ladle on Ethan's hand. Ow, Mia, don't make me call the police, I'll do it! As a result, we don't care when she's shot by Chris. In fact, I cheered. I thought this was Capcom responding to the retrospective Mia hate train by just removing her from the story altogether, or impossibly trying to make both choices in Resident Evil 7 canon. At the start of Resi 7, we were fully aligned with Ethan because Mia's harrowing message was superbly presented to make her initially sympathetic. But as for Village's first impressions, we're likely left baffled by her bizarre characterization. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind. The time spent in the Winters house is clearly to make us bond with Rose. She's a cute baby, the camera purposefully framing her below Ethan's eyeline so we keep being reminded of how adorable she is as she's sleeping. He's grown paranoid over time, collecting books on gun ownership, checking the front door is locked. All of this highlights his discomfort, despite the peacefulness of residential life. The house is littered with objects which are foreboding, similar to what we saw in the opening of Resident Evil 3 Remake. Medication in the bathroom, bottles and bottles of wine littered around the dining area and kitchen. The mirrors are all smudged or completely covered. Of course, the latter is due to the game's desperation to keep Ethan's face hidden from the player, but we can also connect it to this motif of fairy tales, of supernatural villains wanting to conceal their reflections. Ultimately, it's all a means of reinforcing that Ethan is struggling with the events of Louisiana, despite it being 3 years later.
Chris? What the hell?
Sorry, Ethan.
No! What? Why?
The oppressive atmosphere of the house is capitalized on when Chris Redfield shoots Mia, and it's here that Prop's first convention, abstentation, appears. Ethan's fairy tale begins with something going missing and someone leaving. Mia dies and Chris kidnaps Rose. Which means we have to talk about Chris Redfield. There is zero justification for Chris's behaviour in this game. He is a Category A arsehole when he breaks into Ethan's house, and it's all purely because of how Village wanted to set up this mystery of what's the deal with Chris Redfield, which is answered, but not in a remotely satisfying way. The entire scene is framed like the entrance of a villain. There's no music here, just the muted crunching of bullets in Mia's chest and the smashing of wine glasses. Chris himself is shrouded in darkness, the headlights of the car in the driveway glinting evilly down Ethan's hallway. The way he apologizes to us is like a sullen teenager needing to return a toy he nicked, and his cronies bark orders at Ethan, shoving him along while Chris steals the guy's daughter. The player is left with one clear impression. Chris Redfield is a bad guy now. And look, for longtime fans of the series, we've seen Chris grow into a darker character throughout his story. Resident Evil 6 showed a petulant, vengeful Chris, screaming at his friends and colleagues and ignoring all sense. It's not entirely unbelievable for him to be this much of a dick, but considering the justification given to us later, the only reason he is presented this way is so that Capcom can fold him up and package him into a mystery box. And worst of all, Chris's characterization has a detrimental impact on Ethan. Matthew Bird wrote, I walked away from Resident Evil Village with mixed feelings about the whole thing, but the one aspect of the long-awaited sequel I had no mixed feelings about was leading man Ethan Winters and his status as the absolute worst. Buddy, pal, Ethan Winters isn't the absolute worst, but the framing of Village's story is. Village has numerous flaws, but the biggest obstacle is a very simple one. Nobody ever tells Ethan anything. No wonder the guy wanders about like a bloody womble during his travels. No wonder he keeps asking, what? Because characters continuously withhold information from him for no discernible reason. Mia keeps yelling at him that he doesn't understand things, when she refuses to tell him that he's infected with the mold. Chris keeps getting irritated that this soldier that he trained goes off on a suicide mission to rescue his daughter after he shot the guy's wife and nicked his baby without explanation. All it would have taken during the, 5 minutes they spend in the house together would be 3 sentences. That wasn't your wife, Mia's been kidnapped, we're moving you and Rose to a safe house. But Chris doesn't, and it makes Ethan appear gormless when in reality it's just the storytellers going out of their way to keep the mystery box bullshittery alive. So leave Ethan alone and kindly chuck your hot takes into the bin where they belong. Ethan's dumbfoundedness isn't a problem of characterization, it's a problem of narrative. The two are very separate aspects to critique. Our first 10 minutes comes to an end in the dead of night. The truck is crashed, Chris and Rose are gone, Ethan is unarmed, unprepared, and despite the military training previously referenced, both the player and our faceless dad are disempowered in the woods. And this is where Village gets obscurity right. It's insufferably dark in the forest. The trees are so thick that the moonlight can't even penetrate the snow. The game purposefully makes it impossible to take in your surroundings through having the injured Ethan limply casting his torch down low to the ground rather than straight ahead. It creates claustrophobia in what should be vastness, a trick Village adopts regularly. That cultivation of horror that Resident Evil 7 made the most of is here in a really organic way. Because the torch is angled low, the player is forced to focus on the thin tracks in the snow. Your attention is on the gloom, so when a loud bang, snap or snarl ekes out somewhere from the right or the left or behind you or somewhere that you can't pinpoint, it comes as a shock. Worst of all, I was concentrating so fiercely on these footprints that suddenly walking into a dead crow tied to a rope made me kick myself. The liquid blackness that Ethan marches through has another purpose though. Making it out of the shack, hearing a monster nearby but not yet seeing it, we're met with a sudden, bizarre shift of light. Seconds before, we couldn't see 3 feet in front of ourselves, but once we reach the edge of the village itself, it's a bright and crisp morning, despite only a few minutes having passed. It's like this space exists out of time, its own little pocket dimension removed from the world. It's Neverland, Wonderland, any fairy tale space that speaks to you, but this dramatic reveal sets up how isolated Ethan is, because the village signposts to us that it doesn't exist in the world he once knew. The gothic castle in the distance, the ramshackle huts below, the periodic windmills and the overbearing mountainscapes capitalize on this. The village is shut off from outsiders, hidden away, but from a gameplay perspective, this gorgeous, distant shot gives us our landmarks and goals to head toward from the get-go. If Resi 8 didn't give us this scene, I don't think I'd have liked it half as much as I do. In one still, it unifies the clashing fables of the Batlord's castle, the Dollmaker's estate, the Fish King's reservoir and the Iron Steed's domain into one sprawling environment, one story. It's all part of the same mythical landscape. Ethan has entered the world of the fairy tale.
Out of my brains today playing this game. Absolutely. But do you know what? There's no atmosphere. I can't get immersed in it. There's nothing to get immersed in. There's no kind of foreboding atmosphere like when you play Outlast. Or when you know what? Let's forget Outlast. Resident Evil 2. When I was going around Resident Evil 2, I was shitting myself. Do you know, I wasn't one bit scared playing this game. There wasn't 1 ounce of fear.
We need to talk about how we define good horror, because it didn't scare me might be a valid description of your experience, but frustratingly modern analysis of horror games has devolved into it's too fast, I shoot too much, it's not as scary as Resident Evil 7. Now I'm only going to say this once, so you at the back perk up and then I'll let you go back to sleep. Resident Evil Village doesn't need to be scarier than Resident Evil 7. What it needs to do as a horror game is fill you with dread.
What have you done to my daughter?
Make you feel uncomfortable. And make you panic when it needs to.
This gun's useless.
A great horror game can take many different forms, but did it scare me is only a surface, deep reflection when breaking down how effective a horror it is. Scared is the final product of numerous other emotional states. Suspense, discomfort, and most of all, tension. Without tension, your horror game falls flat on its face. Resident Evil 1 provided tension through the fixed camera angles and door animations to build the potential threat on the other side. Your isolation and watching the STARS team be ripped apart in the opening seconds rinsed the experience with an understanding that what should be a team of predators are actually prey. Village is full of tension. By the time we reach the village, we still haven't seen our first monster. We've got glimpses of one, we've heard it, we've seen the carnage that it can inflict. Yet despite this, Ethan has already injured himself, nicking his finger on some barbed wire, and he's covered in blood just from exploring the first cabin. If tension was a pimple, it's beginning to seep pus. Fear is ready for it to pop.
What?
Despite itself, the pimple keeps growing. The village is abandoned. Again, no music, just a howling wind to keep you going. The trashed house is just background noise to the really interesting details of the goat heads. The uncertainty of whether or not these are here for ceremonial purposes or strung up as bait for something adds to the pregnancy of the situation. For reasons illogical and purely atmospheric, Ethan doesn't turn his torch on when he enters the darkness of the abandoned homes. It's a perfect example of how the game often refutes the realism of its story in favor of its atmosphere.
Asteroid is
Ethan
depleted.
should be turning his damn torch on in locations like this one, but he won't. It's not an option. What this does is act in a similar way to the door animations in Resi 1, where it gated off monstrous revelations to reset the pace of the horror every time you enter a new area. With Resi 8, the slow, painful seconds which pass as Ethan's eyes acclimatise to indoor spaces act as a similar means of momentarily resetting the pace and building suspense, but without tearing the camera out of his head. There's so much methodical build-up before we meet our first monster that when we finally encounter it, that horror bursts out of the game.
Who is? What the hell was that? Gun? What? Please tell me you have a gun. No, why would I?
It isn't the blood oozing from the ceiling which is the most effective part of this, but the bodies underneath the building. People who've called Ethan's shock at seeing a dead body are missing the point. It's not the dead body which shocks him, it's the fact that these monsters can think. They stockpile the corpses to feed on later. They're not blind mold monsters or even ganados which kill on sight, and that's the end of the story. Giving the Lycans intelligence and how they've evolved over time in the village adds to their threat. Whilst so much of Village's first hour is heavily scripted, its guiding hand is at least skilled in its reveals. Watching the Lycan feast in the distance is just far away that I, at least, felt clever for spotting it so early on, but then, oh god, shit! There's a great interview with Hideki Kajima where he discusses the prevalence of eyeballs in Resident Evil. They're the squishy, weak parts of most of our Resi bosses, but the thought process behind this was always focused around a game's participatory nature. To Kajima, he found eyeballs in games personally uncomfortable because that's the primary way that a player interacts with the medium. We witness a character's story, navigate their movements, use them to attend to scares. But both Resident Evil 7 and 8, being in first person, focus their attention more on Ethan's hands. We can meme it up all we like, blah blah blah, Capcom hates Ethan's hands, but the concentration on fingers and wrists isn't just because there are only visual connection to Ethan, it's also because of Kajima's philosophy. While you witness the events of horror with your eyes, it's your fingers which do all the work, squeezing triggers and pushing buttons which have that kinetic tie to Ethan. Ethan losing his fingers is that explosion the game's been building to. This isn't Mia chopping off Ethan's hands in Resident Evil 7, this is a smaller, arguably grosser injury because of how rough it is. The Lycan targets the hand which was cut in the barbed wire earlier, the one which got covered in blood back in the shack, which melds that cleverness we've noted in the Lycans hoarding the bodies with a beastly animalistic rage. In short, our first encounter opens its attention wide open and teaches us that this game has stakes, which will make the body horror more intense later. Yes, I know, I fucking know, alright, we'll get to that. On a macro level, Village is more concerned with providing tension to the player rather than overt horror. Of course, there are exceptions like Beneviento's house, but we'll talk about that glory bowl in a later part. Here, the ramp up is similar to Resident Evil 4. It's mere seconds before Ethan is overwhelmed, but the Lycans continue to be introduced in fresh ways, adding dimension to how they inhabit the village. First, you take on an enemy in a circular arena with a well to cheese it on. Then, you're locked in a claustrophobic space, furries on every side, but with the ability to limit their entrance. And then just as you're beginning to get a handle on things, you step outside, and this is what you're faced with. They're watching and waiting, predatorial. They can reach rooftops with ease, and they play with their food, and when they're activated, it's a timed encounter which lasts an average of 7 minutes. Unlimited waves of enemies hoovering up what little ammo you're able to scrap together. All doors leading to progress are locked, and for a first-time player, the village's first section is so labyrinthian that it feels like there should be somewhere you can go, some item you can find. The introduction of the Lycans drips with anxiety and panic. This fairy tale town isn't whimsical or magical, it's overrun with villains. Little Red Riding Hood is dead, man, sacrificed to the altar of horror. Her gran is back in that basement with half of the village people because this time the werewolf brought his friends. The same goes for the cornfield, with its 6-foot-tall wheat which masks enemies from view. As often as this area is used with backtracking, it's a shame we don't get a vast field to explore later on, at night, in the rain, Jeepers Creepers 2 style. I don't know, maybe we'll get that in the DLC, but it's a serious missed opportunity considering how effectively crazy this can feel the first time through.
These people want to let a dying man into our home.
Come now, these people are our friends. Go on, go inside. Come now, this way. You're not from this village.
Where Resi 4 was solely populated with Ganados aimlessly going through the motions as the parasite took over their brains, shadows of their former selves, Village has an honest-to-God population to introduce us to the little society which has formed here. We see the last of the village clustered around the table, we catch a glimpse of their interpersonal politics. Anton is the town drunk, Louisa is devoutly religious, they clash over the intentions of the hag we met earlier. We get to witness their prayer to Mother Miranda, providing meat to their cult, where Los Illuminados remained purposefully vague to harness its otherness. But Ethan is the other here. See, that Tolkien quote at the start wasn't all for nothing. To fairy tale creatures, man is the supernatural, the devilish threat. Just because the villagers are human doesn't make them any less of a fable. They refer to Ethan as an outsider numerous times in this scene, nobody bothering to ask his name because they suspect he'll be dead soon anyway. We are treated with the utmost suspicion in Louisa's house. Leonardo grumbles at us, Anton barks at us, a gun is pointed in our face. Hell, earlier, before we even meet this group, the villager who gives us our pistol is disgusted with us when he learns we haven't come to town armed. Despite the lichens running rampant, the villagers are so closed off that they see us as the danger here, and it adds to that fairy tale man out of time motif which courts our playthrough. When Anton yells at us that there is no one left, we're inclined to believe him, so that when Leonardo begins to fall silent during the prayer and eventually turns, butchering everyone in the room, it solidifies how isolated Ethan is here. We've just watched our last possible allies bleed out, and Elena doesn't hang around long enough to be of any use whatsoever. Structurally, this whole sequence has an ebb and flow of hope dipping into a sick loneliness. We meet the group, hooray, but they're slaughtered, damn it. But we have Elena, hooray, but she lands a fiery death, damn it. Oh, but there is someone left after all, hooray, but the enigmatic Mother Miranda eats his heart, damn it. Prop's second and third fairy tale conventions appear here. Moments before her death, Elena warns Ethan not to go to Dimitrescu Castle. This is our interdiction. Ethan ignores this warning and goes to the castle anyway with grave repercussions. This is our violation.
What? Where? You mean you'll screw around with him in private? Where's the fun in that? Give him to me, and I'll...
It's Asterion.
The Lords slot into gothic archetypes. The vampire, Dr. Frankenstein, the malformed helper, the witch, and the mentally ill shut-in pulled straight from a Bronte novel. But the game also continues its fairy tale themes in their symbolic nature. The repercussions of Ethan ignoring Elena's warning is, of course, the meeting of our storybook villains. Dimitrescu, the prototypical evil countess stepmother, Beneviento, the quintessence of the craftsman, or in this case woman, Moreau, the merman, and Mother Miranda, the witch. Heisenberg is our rogue element, stomping about with his abominably large hammer, hamming up every scene with his best Nicolas Cage impression. He's the least fairy tale-like of our lords, not fitting snugly into a trope, but his agency later in the story and his deep-seated hatred for the rest of our freaky family makes this seem intentional. Village continues to build on the liveliness of its setting in this scene. I mentioned before about how we see the interpersonal politics of the townsfolk, but the upper echelons of the cult get more fleshing out as well. In the space of just a few lines of dialogue, we learn of Heisenberg's reluctant alliance with the others, that Beneviento speaks through her terrifying doll companion, painting her as shy and elusive. Moreau is a skulking, cowardly creature bottom of the food chain. Dimitrescu owns the room, both in stature and presence, but ultimately bows to Miranda's decision to give us to Heisenberg. In keeping with the game's focus on familial relations, if Miranda is the mother, the big woman and fedora guy are clearly the big brother and sister, with doll lady and fishman rounding off the annoying younger siblings. Returning to how the game focuses on tension, Village's scripted chase sequences, of which there are a few, dull the horror to no end. Here, Heisenberg counts down from 10, and then Ethan, his hands bound and restricted, needs to run from a pack of lichens, who could follow and peel the skin from our face if they wanted to, but because of how on rails this is, they seem to be too busy sniffing their own arses to be a serious threat. The two traps which wait ahead are easy to overcome, and just like with Resident Evil 3 Remake's introduction of Nemesis, so much of this translates as artificial and gamey. It doesn't hold a candle to the overwhelming odds we felt after our first encounter with the lichen, but like a roller coaster ride instead. The level design needed to be more maze-like here, so the player could trip into the creation of their own terror when they hit a dead end and needed to double back. Instead, we feel like we're being ushered along a discount haunted house. However, the game's use of tension isn't just mechanical. There's a narrative oppression to how over-familiar the lords are with Ethan. So many characters seem to know his entire personal history. Dimitrescu's daughters know exactly who he is, why he's here, and what he's been through. Lady Dimitrescu remarks, "Let's see how special you really are." Heisenberg proclaims, "Let's see if you're as strong as they say." Even the Duke knows our entire deal, and every time one of our baddies makes these absurd statements, a player is likely to ask, "Who says? Why do you think I'm special?" There's a plot explanation for this, but thematically, it's because he's Tolkien's man, the other. Ethan shouldn't be here. Up until the last 10% of the game, this isn't his land. A few days before Village dropped into our laps, creative director Morimasa Sato was interviewed by IGN and discussed one of the design philosophies behind the game. "I think that beauty and horror don't have to be mutually exclusive," he said. Castle Dimitrescu, for example, is gorgeous at first sight, laden with beautiful furniture. However, if you take a close look, there might be something eerie lying on the table. When you see a patch of blood on an otherwise elegantly decorated wall, the beauty of the wall gives the blood a stronger impact. By adding a sense of beauty that wasn't present in Resident Evil 7, I think we can make the presentation and atmosphere even more horrific. It's how jarring the beautiful and the horrific are which stands out in Castle Dimitrescu. Just like with the Spencer Mansion in 1 or the majesty of the RPD in 2, both beauty and disgust in Resident Evil games has never been an act of subtlety. Where 7 is so in your face with its rot and sepsis, 8 is primarily concerned with how it can contrast its foulness with how gorgeous it can be. 7 yelled and berated the player in its first few hours, forcing you to eat disgusting food, shoving a knife into your mouth, giving you environments which are decomposing. Once it gets going, it rarely ever relents with how over the top its gruesomeness is. Village shocks you in turn with the extreme carnage, having 2 of Ethan's fingers bitten off to the point where we can see the bone, being chased around a basement by a mewling fetus. But Resi 8 keeps things lively and narratively tense because it beautifies its horror.
Well, Ethan and his... You escaped my lord. Did you? Let's see how special you are.
Once you enter the castle, it becomes immediately clear that Ethan is trapped. Dimitrescu's daughters capture us and take us to the lady herself, where we get to see the big woman in all of her glory. With Ethan huddled on the ground, her size is so much greater than the memes could ever position her as, and the shock of how tall she remains, even when we're strung up above her, keeps her imposing. Lady Dimitrescu wouldn't be half of the villain she is to fans if she was regular sized. Just because her arms and legs look normal doesn't mean that this is not body horror, a Resident Evil staple that we'll touch on later with Moreau. The size of her body, despite being sexualized by Twitter, is horrifying when we come face to face with her. The castle itself is a fascinating, gorgeous setting. Both above and below, it's doused in malignant reds, and the lack of signposting in the level design means that the player is encouraged to lose themselves in its decadence. In my Jedi Fallen Order critique, I discussed homostereosis, where a game trains the player to recognize specific colors in an environment to guide their way. Just like Jedi, just like Uncharted, just like Resident Evil 3 Remake, just like so many modern title games, you'll spend a good chunk of your time in the village and the reservoir specifically following the yellow. I never, ever want to see yellow in a goddamn video game again. Yellow on the ladders, yellow spool to follow, yellow on the friggin' boxes, which Ethan can break. Christ, even later on, Heisenberg pulls out the yellow paint and slops it all over some literal signs for us to follow. I firmly believe that Resident Evil Village is a 15-hour game which, for reasons beyond me, is terrified of letting the player get lost for too long in its world. So it strings you along, refusing to let you rely on your orienteering skills and cutting 5 of its hours in the process. There are a few reasons why people generally point to Castle Dimitrescu as the best location in the game, and one of those reasons is because its follow the yellow moments are few and far between. For the most part, the player is left to their own devices. Find keys, solve puzzles, consider backtracking through areas in case they missed a clue. You're given your objective to find and collect the 4 masks, and then you need to rely on your map and your understanding of the space to muster through. So, with that in mind, here's a question. Why do we like old buildings so much in Resident Evil games? Ashford Manor, Salazar's Castle, the RPD, the Spencer Mansion. Why do we gravitate to these spaces so much? Part of it is the contrast of luxurious architecture with dark secrets. An illustrious painting of Lady Dimitrescu is terrifying because its beauty is sat side by side with a dungeon overflowing with blood. The lovingly crafted statues we need to retrieve the masks from are polished marble, but they portray an exploitative scene of a maiden being murdered. But I think there's another reason. Old buildings harness decades, centuries even, of history. An old building has more potential for twisted, dark secrets than a modern building, like say a military base or a ship, simply because it's existed for longer. There's a potential around every corner for more scares, more lore in everything, from the statues, to the paintings, to the diary entries you might find. And that potential is scarier than anything else because it leaves so much of it up to a player's imagination. With an old building, especially in a Resident Evil game, it's likely, even if you explore every nook and cranny of a mansion or castle, even if you platinum the game, there are horrible histories left unknown, because generations and generations of people have haunted these spaces at one point or another. Potentiality is king with a fully explorable horror space, and considering Castle Dimitrescu has not one but 4 spooks for us to learn about, there's so much potential here for the game to toy with. Letters from servants, lists of victims, living spaces like the Opera House, which give us insight to the residents' personal lives, their likes, dislikes. Old places afford more opportunities for us to learn about the residents' evil. And speaking of the residents, let's talk about the ladies of the castle.
In fact, many a village's boss encounters come up surprisingly short in a strategic sense. While they certainly escalate in scale and spectacle as you get closer to the story's climax, very few amount to much more than circle strafing and shooting them in their glowing bits until they drop.
So I've heard this in a few reviews now, the idea that some of the bosses feel anticlimactic, and more often than not, those reviewers are talking about Dimitrescu's daughters. It's baffling to me that reviewers are rating 3 mini-bosses to the same standards as the actual bosses of the game, because that's what they are, mini-bosses. And as mini-bosses, their battles are fairly decent.
Short.
Each one feels tense because you're trapped in a confined space with them, and each consecutive daughter adds a new twist to how you take them down. With Bella, you're locked in a tight-knit space with no obstacles to hide behind. It's a straight-up battle to the death with no room to hide.
Nice,
Yellow
nice.
gives you a larger space with obstacles to separate the two of you, but you need to keep opening up the roof to let the cold in, momentarily leaving you vulnerable rather than remaining on the defensive. Finally, Cassandra combines the previous 2 gimmicks, a claustrophobic space and a gap you need to blow up to let the cold in. These are hardly boss fights of the year, but I don't know if you've played a horror game recently, very few boss fights in the genre are ever that mechanically interesting. Really cast your mind back to the most iconic horror baddies you can think of. Resident Evil is always run out of the way of attacks
4 was
and
good.
shoot the glowing eye. Kill in the head is just shoot the buff bastard before he cleaves you in 2. The Evil Within's Laura relies on getting away from her, or if you really want to stand your ground, use fire against her. Horror bosses are always more interested in their creepy designs above mechanical intrigue, and Dimitrescu's daughters blend beautified horror perfectly to make them extremely uncomfortable to manage. I can't be the only person who played the castle demo and was slightly let down by the portrayal of the vampiresses, right? I went on the record when I explained the entire Resident Evil lore to my friend that sexy vampire ladies, no matter how much they giggle about wanting to drink my blood, simply weren't scary to me.
The asteroid
But context
is depleted.
everything. The Dimitrescu daughters are gorgeous, and their dialogue is purposefully sexualized. They ramble about how they haven't had a man in a while, and that they want to use our blood as a lubricant, but all of that little titillation drops away when we learn what they truly are. They're carnivorous flies. Just really think about that. Flies which have broken down the bodies of 3 innocent women, reassembled their flesh and bone and sinew, redesigning them to be beautiful when underneath is a hive mind squirting pheromones so they can eat you. They're the flies from the Grim Tale, the brave little tailor who takes pleasure from killing flies before challenging a giant. Not so sexy anymore, are they? Village knows exactly what it's doing with this stuff. It's toying with our expectations. These aren't thirsty vampire women. I'm being chased by rabid flies. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. This is horrible. Get off me. However, the creep factor of the daughters never reached Lady Dimitrescu. Up until the very end, she only felt like a real threat when I was creeping past her chambers and heard her scream, "What have you done to my daughter?" to the rafters, thinking she knew I was outside her door. As a tyrant, she's the least imposing of the franchise. Mr. X's footsteps would clang and echo from half a mile away, always reminding us of his presence. Jack Baker and Marguerite always felt faster than Ethan. If you were caught, that was the end for you. They were destructive stalkers, Jack bursting through walls and Marguerite spreading rot and bugs through her cabin. Lady Dimitrescu is simply too slow.
Mother Miranda, I regret to inform you that Ethan Winters has escaped from Heisenberg. Because he is in my castle and has already proven too much for my daughters to handle. When I find him...
After this scene, Ethan is tossed into a linear area with pillars and barrels for us to use to block Lady D from us. The idea here is sound. It's narrow, so you're never supposed to be more than a few feet away from her long claws, but the cracks in the AI pathing start to show down here. Dimitrescu is sluggish. She has claws which can slice through bone in mere seconds. Yeah, I know. So why is she letting a barrel stand between you and her revenge? Elsewhere in the castle, she's so oblivious to her surroundings that I started to legitimately think there was an in-game reason for why her hearing was so crap. You can nuzzle behind her and stick your tongue up her arse before she even registers your existence. Mr. X and even Nemesis, for the 5 seconds he was actually a threat in 3-make, had wide reaches and quick-fire animations for when you got too close. The goal with them was always to stay as far away as possible, because if you tried to bypass them, they'd snap at you and pummel your face into granite. Lady Dimodick spots you, takes a second to apply some makeup, think up a witty quip, and then chases after you. It spoils the immersion which has been so carefully crafted up until that point. Dimitrescu is interesting, sure. She's so old that again there's so much potential for her history, but the game doesn't give her long enough to really explore that. The same goes for her as a fairy tale stand-in. She's a giantess and a stepmother, or at least an adoptive one, having kidnapped the 3 vampiresses and experimented on them, taking them under her wing. She hides a magical dagger which can turn her mortal somewhere within her castle. That's as fairy tale-like a Deus Ex Machina as you could possibly get, but the dagger really is analogous with a lot of the game's complications. It's never fully explained. And I don't need it to be explained on a scientific level, that's not what I'm saying. Keep that air of mystery around our feral fables. The problem is that it's introduced so passively, in one scrap of paper. The history and the lore around the dagger is something we want to learn about, but it's never even referenced outside of an old dagger, believed to be created in the village, is poisonous. Once Ethan gets the Dagger of Death's flowers, our time in the castle comes to an end. Lady D flies into a rage and we stab her with it, making her mortal and triggering her transformation. And as a boss, I really like her. A heaving mass of bone and teeth, a globular, decaying version of Dimitrescu's wiggling out of the beast's back. There are maleficent parallels in how she, just like Sleeping Beauty's infamous villain, transforms into a dragon. It's batshit enough that it exceeds a player's expectations for where the game could go from here. Despite the tight corridors that you need to run around, the battle feels vast because Dimitrescu can retreat into the sky. This forces you to alternate between your shiny new sniper rifle, which was
that bag
already
is already
tutorialized to
gone.
us with the flying Samka earlier. The constant change of scope keeps the fight feeling panicky and unpredictable, despite the fact that Lady D herself follows a standard 3 phases. But most importantly of all, transforming her into a grotesque mutant, veering away from how gorgeous she has been during her standard pursuit of us, capitalizes on that beautification of horror. You don't want her to step on you anymore, you want her to just hurry up and die because you're running out of bullets, especially on hard mode, and every time you think you've got her, she just changes tact instead. It's like Ethan says, her outside finally matches her inside. Castle Dimitrescu doesn't have a plethora of lore, not like the gothic buildings of previous games, but it has more lore in its bloodied halls than the other Lord's areas combined. Lord. Village is arguably the most fascinating Resi world we've ever got. It bubbles in a cauldron where it really owns its magical realism, but the game on the whole has a real information problem. Similar to how the Dagger of Death's flowers isn't explained enough, the game strays away from the franchise staple of diary entries and catalogues of writings, meaning that certain parts of its world feel shallower than others. They're here, but they're in limited supply.
In life and in death, glory.
Hey, remember me? I almost died up at that castle. Tell me, what is going on around here?
How can a man be almost dead? That's a question for the wise.
Ah, good timing. It's almost like I structured the essay this way. This is our second appearance of the Hag, and the third piece of foreshadowing that Ethan is infected with Resident Evil 7's mold. Our first hint is when Dimitrescu comments that his blood is a little stale. The second is when Ethan glues his hand back on, and the third is, of course, her admittedly hilarious riddle here when she asks us, how can a man be almost dead? But once the Hag leaves us, our attention is drawn to the strange mural of 4 old houses with their corresponding crests, and of course, the umbrella logo set in the middle. The 4 original lords are hideously underexplained. The origins of the village of the castle aren't sewn together like Ashford Mansion or the RPD have been in the past. Who were these lords? Was there conflict? Did they build the castle together? Was there a hierarchy? What did they stand for? The peripheral details, the little stories which make the horror feel so real and human in other Resi games aren't here. But the player is crying out for any scraps of information because of how mysterious the village is. Let's take an example from Resident Evil 1, The Keeper's Diary. It's not exactly Oscar-winning writing, but I think it's funny and interesting, and goddamn, it's my video, so I can do what I want. May 16th, 1998. I heard a researcher who tried to escape from this mansion was shot last night. My entire body feels burning and itchy at night. When I was scratching the swelling in my arms, a lump of rotten flesh dropped off. What the hell is happening to me? May 19th. Fever gone, but itchy. Hungry and eat doggy food.
Hungry, itchy.
Itchy.
Hungry,
Scott
itchy.
came. Ugly
Hungry,
face,
itchy.
So killed him. Tasty. An indistinct time later.
Itchy.
Tasty. These are extracts from a 500-word piece of in-game writing that you can find. The Keeper is not an important character. He's just some guy who turned into a zombie and for some reason kept writing in his diary after he wanted to nom-nom on some brains. This is silly and inconsequential to the rest of the story, but it's here, and it adds flavour to the game world. Contrast this with Norstein. Oh, you don't remember Norstein, even though you played the game just a few weeks ago? I don't blame you. Let me remind you with this handy bit of lore. A craftsman of the late 19th century, Norstein was branded a heretic in his homeland. He wandered the lands until he settled in a remote village. Norstein then created the castle, the house on a hill, the water wheel, and the iron tower.
I heard a
Upon that
train.
completion, he put a gun to his temple and took his own life. If this was Resident Evil 1, we would find numerous pieces of information about Norstein. We'd hear about his relationships with the locals, with the lords. We'd find out what he had for breakfast the morning he ended it all, and what he called his dog. Instead, we get one scrap of paper which is only here to set up the labyrinth puzzles. With a setting like Village, there are so many opportunities for flavourful text which are often missed. Aside from the servant's diary in Castle Dimitrescu, every piece of lore is there to set up an in-game event or character. To return to this engraving, the history of the 4 lords, of their houses,
Gonna pause to eat
origins,
dinner here.
who they were, what they were like, is the sort of stuff which would have been in Resident Evil 1 or 2 or 3. The relevance of the umbrella logo, why this was the design they created in the first place, would have been sketched out in detail somewhere deep in the world for us to uncover. Did they design it because they liked this to represent the equality of their 4 houses, one branch for each? Who knows, because there's no meat on this bone. Later, in the stronghold, Ethan finds himself wangling through the ruins of an old fort, which has been here for God knows how long, possibly since the time of the Lords, possibly built afterwards. We find a scrap of a dusty old diary entry inside which ambiguously describes the siege on the fort and internal politicking which led to that moment, but it's the only piece of information in the stronghold, and it's far too vague to pull anything weighty from. There are moments in the game where the open-endedness of the world adds to the mythical qualities of its game feel, but there's a happy medium which needs to be struck, and after Castle Dimitrescu, the game veers wildly in the wrong direction with its background storytelling. With us coming up on the Duke, it draws attention to an easy win that the game misses here, having him pass on historical details relating to the treasure we collect. This would further incentivize hunting down the rare treasure like goblets or statues, as well as organically reciting optional fables to the player.
Not sure if it's of value, but...
Why, you have your daughter right in your own hands.
What are you saying?
Take a closer.
Speaking with the Duke here sets up Vladimir Prop's fourth fairy tale convention, Reconnaissance. If you remember, this is where the protagonist seeks information and needs to complete tasks, typically in 3s, 4s, or 7s. Here, Ethan needs to collect the 4 parts of Rose, and this is where we find the majority of the game's action. But before the Duke can mark the remaining Lords' locations on our map, we need to venture back into the village, which luckily means we can talk about how the game softens the blow of its lack of in-depth lore, through the fantastic environmental storytelling. Village has some of the strongest level narration in the series to date. Capcom have gone to almost diabolical lengths to make the village feel as lived in as possible. Each shack has unique photographs and paintings of the residents. Technology centuries old was being used here, looms and butter churners. Despite our characters speaking English, a language that we understand, like we're picking up a familiar storybook, the written word in the town is runic and ethereal, scratches and scribbles. Ethan, thankfully harnessing the power of being a video game character, is able to understand this written word. The Kado, used to infect the population, is a Romanian term for gift. Heisenberg's soldiers all have German names, Soldat, Panzer, and so on. There's such a meld of different cultures smashing into each other that it juxtaposes the realistic depiction of our characters, making the horror fantastical. During our early hours in the village and on return visits, we constantly see garlic hanging above the doorways of the houses. Considering how much Capcom doubled down on sexy vampire ladies in the marketing, you're likely going to think that these are up for protection from the Dimitrescu daughters, but when you venture into Castle Dimitrescu and come across the kitchen, you see numerous strands of garlic hanging delicately over human meat. The garlic wasn't to protect the villagers, it was to flavour them, to cover their clothes, their homes, their bodies with the smell. Likely Dimitrescu spread a rumour that vampires would take you in the night and that garlic would protect the villagers, all in an effort to make the common folk season themselves for eating. This is bone-chilling stuff. All of the enemies in Castle Dimitrescu are female, the men have been harvested for their blood. This, combined with the constant references to Ethan being a man thing by the ladies of the castle, reinforces that Dimitrescu favoured female subjects to experiment on over men. Ethan's family photo, it sits in his key items so that every time you jump into your inventory, you're reminded of why Ethan is here and what he's fighting for. Sure, it's cheesy and schlocky, but part of Resident Evil's charm has always been how earnest its character writing is in the face of its abject terror. Albert Wesker killed his father figure because he wasn't loved enough. Chris Redfield mumbles about how much he misses his partner while in the middle of a terrorist uprising. Evelyn cries that she just wanted a family while she turns into a house and then melts. And meshing that into gameplay, even in an arbitrary way like this photo, is a really neat touch. And everything I've said about the leaky faucet of lore and the fabulous in-game storytelling is reflected in the dollhouse. Before you even hit the front door, Beneviento's section reveals to the player that it's not interested in Beneviento as a villain. To its favour and its detriment, her area is very Ethan-centric. It's not just the grotesque imagery and aesthetic similarities between this section and PT which draws the Silent Hill comparisons. That series has always been effective because the scares are personally tied to the psychology of the player character, and by extension, the player. A vision of Mia literally leads us up the garden path. The family photo is a key item to enter the house. The design and look of the front entrance in the living room smells like the Baker estate. The puzzle in the basement is keenly focused on what would disturb Ethan first and foremost, needing to tear apart his dead wife, much like how his daughter has been torn apart. Hearing her speak to him over the radio, being chased by a dead baby, what he believes Rose might be if he fails. Despite Beneviento being one of the most affecting moments of horror in the game, there is zero lore to read up on in her area. No direct information about what Beneviento's deal is. Because the horror is all about Ethan, the dollhouse doesn't get to spare any time to what makes Donna so spooky in her own right. With Lady Dimitrescu, she's all about the blood and the flies and the eating men. Heisenberg hates the other lords, is planning an uprising, is conducting Frankensteinian experiments in his factory. Both of those lords
Frankensteinian.
are exposed to the player, so we can learn about them. Donna Beneviento isn't exposed to the player. We don't get her, we get her doll Angie, and even then, Angie is barely on screen for a few moments. But, as nice as concrete information would have been, and I do think its absence is felt once you take her down, there's a lot of lovely little details which encourage the player to, at the very least, pull together the doll maker's vibe.
I've been waiting for so long. I'd make a much better daughter than Rose. Please, won't you stay with me forever?
Warp drive active. God damn it, Ethan. You make it so hard to defend you sometimes. There's a shrine sat outside of her home. A grave sat in the middle, large enough for two bodies, and an eerie yellow glow emanating from it. Dolls sit alongside it, like someone has placed them here protectively. In the house itself, there are paintings of flowers on the walls, on plates, on teacups and saucers. Whoever lives here is obsessed with flowers to such an astronomical level that you can infer mental illness. The emphasis on dolls here, of them being in every room, watching you, implies that they're filling a void for Donna Beneviento. She lost her parents, which has stunted her mental growth, and she's now living through her dolls. To anyone who's played the game, this will all seem obvious, but don't forget, everything I've just explained to you is told without a single word, a single phrase, a single piece of readable lore telling us as such in Beneviento's area. It's all told through the level narration, but it also leaves the door open for the player to project their own details. We don't know how her parents died, but there's a lot of hanging imagery which is repeated throughout her time in the house. Two specifically are the dolls hanging by their necks from branches in the nearby woods, and the horrific painting which drops as a jump scare of a pregnant Mia, which, once it drops with her neck crooked, looks like she herself is also hung. This is just headcanon, but I theorise that Donna's parents took their own life, dead by hanging, purely because of this harrowing imagery, leaving her orphaned. Whether or not I'm correct is besides the point, but it shows just how powerful some of this environmental storytelling can be, and forcing the player to piece together these details can make the horror cut deeper than skin. Of course, Beneviento's section isn't done there. The player is psychologically chilled because they're rid of their weapons and locked in an eerie space with a haunting mannequin splayed on an operating table. Worst of all, this is supposed to be our safe room, but the chilling iconography makes it feel anything but. The entire section is pregnant, hearing footsteps, echoes, the crackle of Mia's voice over a radio, how the game seems to take such a sharp turn away from fairy tale freaks and vampires and werewolves and into crossing the line in all the right ways. Its tone is now matching its body horror. It's operating in extremes. This isn't to say that Beneviento and Angie don't match the motif of Fables. The inclusion of dolls paints Donna as a Geppetto-like character, the owner of a doll which comes to life, or for something more culturally relevant to Village, we also have the Eastern European tale of Vasilisa the Beautiful. The story goes that a merchant and his wife had a single daughter who was known as Vasilisa. When the girl was 8 years old, her mother died. On her deathbed, she gave Vasilisa a tiny wooden doll with instructions to give it a little to eat and a little to drink if she were in need. Then it would help her. As soon as her mother died, Vasilisa did just this, and it came to life, comforting her, much like how Angie comforts Donna. That Ethan-centric horror comes to fruition when he's chased by a babbling, laughing fetus with a gaping maw and an umbilical cord which trails from where Mia's wooden body lay, where minutes before, Ethan had to cut into the mannequin's torso. It's as if he has now unleashed the creature onto himself. Danny O'Dwyer said it best with, "I'm not sure what's going to win Game of the Year for 2021, but I'm pretty sure Resident Evil Village has the roughest game for parents of young children award locked up." Now, I'm not a parent, but my partner and I started having serious conversations about the next step of our relationship, about planning for a family, and just with the inklings of being a future parent in my brain, this was rough, man. And it's purely because of that drip of a build-up opposed by how over the top, how shocking, how overwhelming the scene is. There's a metallic quality to the baby's laughing. You don't have a map, so you need to frantically remember the quickest route back to the nearest puzzle so you can finish it before you get eaten. And despite the game ridding you of weapons, the baby can eat you, so the game feel hasn't been drastically changed like, say, when Nemesis chases you in Remake. Lady Dimitrescu showcased how the replayability of the game as a horror is saturated by the scripted nature of its scares. The baby, through dint of being so distressing in design and execution, showcases that parts of Village still have bite, even when you know what's coming. Unfortunately, we are so on edge after the sequence in the basement that Beneviento's demise sucks.
Get him. Eat them.
Hide and seek against a house full of dolls which are out to kill you sounds great in principle, but it takes aeons for the dolls to actually attack Ethan, even on Village of Shadows difficulty. Here I am, trying to capture footage of them rushing us, and I had to sit on my Todd for the entire period of time it takes to make a cup of tea for the attack to trigger. And if you've seen my critique of Watch Dogs Legion, you know that this is how I judge if something took too long. This boss fight, if we can even call it that, is easier than the mini-bosses of the Dimitrescu daughters. It's evidence of how little love Donna and Angie got in comparison to the basement-dwelling horror show that Capcom were rightfully so proud of. And I firmly believe that it's because of how personal to Ethan they wanted to make the dollhouse as an area. When it was finally complete, it was like the developers forgot that Beneviento was even here. Which sounds like a sour point to leave off on, I know, but I'm saving all of my bitterness for Moreau. So let's talk about the merman. What do we even say about Salvatore Moreau? His area is as pitiful as he is. It's the briefest section, is clearly underdeveloped, and has the least polish. It isn't tense, it isn't scary, it isn't exhilarating like previous moments are, which breaks my heart, because aside from Stewie Griffin over here, Moreau has the most grisly creature design in the game. He leaks. Moreau resets the tension so drastically that the scariest part of his area is when you turn a corner and see the Duke squeezed into this room, leering down at you, and because I have so little to say about Fishboy, I'm splitting this part between him and the merchant.
What do you mean, mother's special child?
Mother wants her baby back.
Don't screw with me.
Wait, please. If you take it, then the others will laugh at me.
Moreau doesn't inhabit a visual depiction of a merman. He isn't glossy, he isn't beautiful, he doesn't look anything like Jason Momoa, and it's enough to ask Capcom for a refund. He's the antithesis of a merman in his looks, but his mollusk-like body, his fat, flabby fish lips, the bones which he's fashioned into a makeshift crown, put a really intriguing spin on the classic Fable. He's treated by Miranda's family like how Ethan is treated by the fanbase. He's pathetic. You mentally slot him into the little brother of the Lords, and he's so eager to please his demonic mistress. He's far removed from how calculated Lady D, Heisenberg, and Beneviento are as characters. The brief pieces of information we get about him teach us that, despite the horrific experiments he's conducted on the locals, he doesn't seem to fully understand what he's doing, mashing square pegs into round holes, in the hope that one day, somehow, he'll make Mother Miranda proud. But Moreau suffers from a similar issue to Beneviento. There's simply not enough here to make him dramatically interesting, especially when compared to the other lords. And where the dollhouse used its environmental storytelling to dilute your disappointment and morph it into something closer to abject terror, Moreau's area is dull in both level design and, of all things, colour. Where Dimitrescu had a consistent red colour palette and history etched into its environments, and Beneviento had a diseased yellow peel that was comparable with the Baker Estate style, Moreau is grey. Grey, 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 grey everywhere. The water's grey, the lighting's grey, Moreau is grey. The caves leading up to our first encounter with him leads a player to believe that this is going to be a maze that we're going to get lost in, with the potential for jump scares and sound design which could clang off of walls as we burrow underground. There's one really neat moment of design which can be praised in a vacuum. The use of light bleeding into the cave from the outside draws the player's attention to where the boat waits for us. We're so focused on the entrance to the cave that we're led out to the boat, realise we need to get a key, and as we return to the cave entrance, we see a stairwell with a lamp guiding us to the next point organically. Unless you're looking for it, you can't see the stairwell because of how natural light reflects off of the cave walls. But this is the only part of Moreau's section where you'll feel like the tunnels are acting against you. cavern and sewer areas are always the worst parts of Resident Evil games. The nature of the environment grows stale the longer you play through these areas because it's inevitably samey, and the developers clearly thought that the cure-all would be to show one and skip past it in minutes, with a single grotto for us to clear out, but we're yet to have a pursuer or tyrant enemy chase us through a cavern, and I think Moreau was a missed opportunity to make this a first for the series. Speaking of missed opportunities, the goop. The goddamn goop. Moreau's goop should hurt us. It's made from the same substance as the acid rain he launched at us later during his boss fight. Having the goop give us damage would force the player to move through Moreau's cavern slowly, to be tactical about positioning during battle, to add some level of threat and danger to a section which really, really needs it.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Now I'm guessing this will be as close to a platforming section as Resident Evil will ever get, and I do not want it to try again. You rush across platforms as Moreau swims about in a rage, pulling cranks and turning levers, timing platforms to make it across sections in time, but it's where the game prints its scripting out and pins it to its head. Moreau will only ever crash into floating planks of wood. He will only attack you on certain platforms. Shooting him doesn't slow him down or make him passive for a short period of time. It's all pure spectacle. And as we've discussed in prior analysis, when Resi goes full spectacle, it destroys its tension. Couple that with the fact a giant fish is doing somersaults over you while yelling, "Watch me, mama," like he's Squidward in the SpongeBob musical, and the Resident Evil ridiculousness begins to lose its allure. Did you know that, by the way? There's a SpongeBob SquarePants musical. It's about the characters coming to terms with the apocalypse. It's surprisingly funny and clever, and the music actually seems to blend. We have given Moreau as much attention as the story does, so before reviewing his boss fight, let's talk about the Duke.
Though I must say, that castle arouses suspicion.
Yeah, and so do you.
I am but a humble merchant.
Resident Evil, as a series, has always operated in the extreme. Time and the new expectations growing older is set for horror has dulled the extremes of the older games, but extreme, spelt with an X, not an E, has always been at the forefront of the series, particularly with how it's portrayed bodies to us. When we got our first sight of the Duke, thegamer.com published this article titled "Resident Evil Village's Duke represents a tired trope of fat shaming." Now, I don't think this is a particularly good take, mainly because the whole thing hinged on the assumption that the Duke would be a baddie because he's large. Quote, "Fat as a character trait is almost always synonymous with overindulgent or bad. He'll be a villain or a fraudster." The article failed to look at Resident Evil's history with body horror, specifically that it's always understood that for better or worse, bodies which are extremely out of proportion with their expectations have always razzled up a bit of unease in an audience. The Hunter's long arms have always been out of sync with their short bodies. Tyrants traditionally have tiny pea heads in contrast to their lumbering size. Police Chief Brian Irons has teeny tiny little hands and a massive melon head. In Resi 7, Marguerite's transformation leads to a grossly inflated womb, stubby legs, and arms which go on for miles. Moreau's body is bloated in relation to his tiny stick.
It's been a good day.
It's not just his drooling.
I haven't got some raid content. I never get that. I don't want it, but it's good to get it, you know. Got to run my mouth for about 10 minutes. Fun. I like bullying people verbally.
But it's all in keeping with Resi's fascination with bodies which are extreme.
Mary, all this for a child who isn't even here.
Like I said before, this applies to her too. The Duke isn't a villain. He's our friend, our guide, and at the end of the game, our savior. In fairy tale terms, he's the travelling tradesman who sets our character off on their quest. He's Mary de Morgan's peddler, or Joseph Jacob's salesman who sells Jack the magic beans. Playing on primal expectations like fat equals bad is something all horror is prone to do when you break down their components. The big-titted sexy nurses in Silent Hill are unnerving because they lack facial dimension, while their bodies are disproportionately sexualized. And whilst this physical appearance is lacking in lipstick, the Duke's fancy collection, his wagon, his UI even, is beautified and elegant, right down to the calligraphied font being used. Just like with Castle Dimitrescu, there's a beautification at play here. The Duke is just an extremely fat character. The fact an ally is fat doesn't necessarily make it fat-shaming. I'd argue that writing an article which highlights that you think he's going to be a villain because he's a big boy is. Mechanically, the Duke affords an opportunity to tie the player and Ethan together. Everything I'm about to say applies to the merchant in Resident Evil 4 as well. Resource management is a staple of your classic Resi games, forcing the player to constantly trade between health, ammo, and key items. In 1, this added to the tension of backtracking. You would need to retrace areas you were familiar with in the mansion, affording the game opportunities to switch up the scares and add new grizzlies to spaces you initially thought were safe. Resident Evil Village is less interested in making you run out of space. You can upgrade your inventory with ease. Yup, I pronounced it inventory. You can criticize Scottish accents when you get free healthcare, Americans. Your key items and your craftables are held in a different space to your standard inventory, which means that the player is rarely faced with that typical frustration they might feel in older games. Village is less interested in the tension of its resource management, the question of, do I take more health or ammo this time, because you will never run out of room. It's more interested in encouraging you to invest in Ethan as a vehicle. The most impactful thing about an in-game economy is how this relates to player agency. In an unpredictable and threatening environment, staying in control also reflects the level of protection a player can provide to the player character. Through the Duke, we are afforded more options and more opportunities to prepare Ethan for the dangers ahead. We are incentivized to battle Lycans because they drop money and resources. We're encouraged to backtrack through the village, navigating locked doors and rubble to hunt down gear, ammo, healing items, and animals to cook. Come here. But the uncertainty of which dangers lie ahead, especially in Village where it throws a new enemy type or scenario at you per hour, means that even though you've got a fully leveled up shotgun,
I didn't
you can never
dump.
be 100% certain that you've upgraded Ethan enough for what's next. There's a fair argument to be made that crafting and upgradables can evolve the game feel from careful horror experience to a shooty bang bang time, but I've often found that removing the ability to improve the player character often adds to how scripted a game can feel. Even the original Resi games give you upgrades to find, but in titles like, say, Outlast, your options are supremely limited. You run or hide, and that's it. You're always moving forwards because there's no reason to go out of your way to strengthen yourself. In Resident Evil 4, the merchant is vital because of the decision-making involved in the moment-to-moment gameplay. I need to move here to pick up this money before it fades away. That might put me in the path of enemies, but it's a risk I'm willing to take, adding tension. The Duke operates in much the same way. He's not interested in experience points, he's interested in money and food, which means that a player's exploration has further layers added to it. It's not just lore, key items, or ammunition you're rummaging through drawers and wardrobes for, it's goodies to give you a fighting chance. This is where the survival appears in our survival horror, in giving you options and choice on how you will survive. The early Resident Evils gave you options in which items to take and when. Resi 4 and Village, by extension, give you options on which dimensions of Ethan or Leon you'll prioritize in survival. Morimasa Sato said that he thinks a good survival horror gives a player the feeling of overcoming a nightmare, and the Duke is a mechanical means of doing that. By the end of the game, for better or worse, you do feel like you've overcome the village, like you've risen up. Village mediates the potential for feeling too strong and too armed in the fact that unlike the Ganados in Resident Evil 4, enemies never drop bullets. You can only arm yourself through buying from the Duke, which he has in limited supply, crafting them, which requires you to find resources, or uncovering them through exploration. Where Leon could survive in Resident Evil 4 purely through the loop of killing enemies, picking up ammo and health from them, and killing them again, Village demands that you explore if you want to be able to fight. This, in theory, is smart game design, but unfortunately the game's 4 difficulties haven't been fully optimized to make the most of this experience. On casual, you'll end a Lycan with a couple of shots to the head. On normal, the ammo expenditure is still just not enough to truly make it feel like you're low on ammunition at all times. Hard is the optimal way to play the game if you want to really emulate the tension of encounters, with a Lycan taking an average of 10 shots to the head to finish them off. But the difficulties only seem to affect the tankiness of enemies and the damage taken, rather than relying on procedural difficulty or scarcity of resources like previous Resident Evil games were oft to do. Bullets will still appear in a reliable quantity no matter what difficulty you're playing on, which undercuts a lot of the clever choices made by the design of the game's economy. We'll return to talking about this sort of thing when we explore combat in the next section, but for now, we finally drain the reservoir, leading into Moreau's boss fight. For all of my gripes about the reservoir as a location, I think Moreau is the second best boss fight in the game. His arena has pathways and options for you to take: hide in a shack, corner him by a red barrel, and so on. Visually, he's grown grosser every time we've encountered him, and his surprising speed in these tight corridors can take the player unawares if they're not prepared for it. The inclusion of the goop walls, whilst still not applying damage to the player, requires you to spend ammo to give you more room to escape, decreasing Ethan's potency as a combatant. But best yet, and this applies to all the bosses in the game, despite it not being telegraphed to the player, you don't just...
Cost me 10 gold to buy that set. Son of a bitch.
It doesn't do much damage, but it does...
It sucks. But I mean, I need it, so...
And the vomit projectile means you can't just stand in one place and blast him to Kingdom Come without getting...
But now I've got 2 sets, so...
You're the last asshole in my way, aren't you?
You've got fight. I'll give you that, Ethan. But what's the plan when you have all 4 flasks?
What are you trying to get at?
I could lend you a hand.
Not trying to get on my good side?
Now don't get cocky. I'd kill you if you weren't worth the trouble.
Slaughtering Moreau, we can mercifully leave the reservoir, with Heisenberg openly inviting us to visit his stronghold to collect his EvE jar. The underdeveloped design choices continue here, with odd level design and some narrative inconsistencies, but no, wait, let's just leave the reservoir behind and discuss Heisenberg as a whole. Horror games shouldn't have machine guns. Machine guns encourage blindly firing at ghouls and goblins, meaning your aim, your focus, your methodicalness are all less important than how quickly you can squeeze the trigger.
I don't know, Resident Evil 4 did it.
Ammunition in their magazines, meaning
RE4 did it okay.
Broken up by reloading in
Code Veronica,
battle,
I think it did it okay.
When fighting monsters. After all, it takes just one bullet to blow up a red barrel, and if you have a 45 round machine gun, that's water off a duck's back compared to your handgun. Thankfully, Ethan doesn't get a machine gun on his first playthrough. Village saves this for the empowerment fantasy we get as Chris Redfield later. His gunplay is contained to slow firing, powerful shotguns, weaker handguns, sniper rifles which, without an upgrade, provide a sway which muddies your aim. Ethan's comparative slowness in his shooting is at odds with the random, unpredictable movement of the enemies, meaning combat in Village, for the most part, is scrappy. And because of its scrappiness, it's the most panic-inducing combat in the entire series. The Stronghold and Heisenberg's factory are the most combat-heavy areas in the game. I've already discussed how frustrating the Stronghold is as a location due to its lack of explicit historical context, but structurally, there is no reason for Heisenberg to send Ethan here. It's waved away as Mr. Sunglass is testing Ethan's resolve or whatever, but by this point, Ethan has killed 60% of Heisenberg's family and a bunch of monsters. Planting the EvE jar in here serves no narrative purpose. He should have taken it with him to the factory if he wanted to have a sit-down with us. There's no secret, no information, no reconnaissance which Ethan uncovers in the Stronghold because it's so devoid of lore. The only reason Ethan comes here is to battle some Lycans and a mini-boss, so that's what we're going to discuss.
That's ultimately what it feels like. It's like, this is a beautiful game. Our team crushed it, but it kind of just feels like a zombie action game. I'm not necessarily feeling foreboding, fear, terror, horror. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. It's, here comes some more of those women with swords. Pow, pow, pow.
Village is not an action game. With an action game, the primary mechanic is the combat itself, and despite what you may have heard, the pew pew pow pow moments are at most.
Yeah, and I dislike this about RE7. A bunch of RE7 was exposition and bad manga story that I didn't really appreciate the style of. And it was too twisted and weird, and it was fine. It pushed the envelope, and it was good, but it wasn't to me truly good horror. And that's where I start to want to be quiet, because I don't know what good horror is. It's hard to define it. I know it's good. I would say the end of Aliens is pretty good for horror when you're like watching her get out of that terrible tense situation. And I would say that was pretty good horror. There were moments in The Ring that were very scary. There were moments in Event Horizon that were very scary. There was times when other like certain horror films when I was young would affect me, like Friday the 13th, shit like that. Or Halloween 1. Halloween 1, when she's in the house with him, and as I recall, she kicks him off the top of the second floor, Michael Myers, in the first engagement she ever has with him in like the 70s or 80s. I think it was the 80s one. Man, I want to rewatch that film. Rob Zombie did a remake of that was actually fucking good. I thought it was like fairly good. The one where Michael goes to where he's older, that one was super good. The remakes of Michael Myers were fucking good. I liked him more than the original, maybe. But although the original Halloween was really truly good horror, because you're like good horror, right? How about Silence of the Lambs, when you're in the audience and she's like trapped in the dark and he's got a MVG, a night vision goggle, and he can see her but she can't see him, and so you're like scared and you're praying for her to like lash out with the knife in the dark for no reason, which is something she's not gonna do. She doesn't know he's there. And that moment of horror when you're like basically trapped in her mind, you can see it from her perspective, which is pitch black, you can see it from his and it's green, and your mind's filling in the blank, and you're like trapped on this journey with her, and you can't tell her what to do, and you can't scream at her being like, he's behind you. You feel trapped and scared and trapped in a corner, and you're like praying for this girl to like wave her, like to swing her knife around blindly in the dark and perhaps hit him, which is just this reality that makes you feel hopeless because that's not going to happen. Likely she's not fucking Lara Croft, she's an FBI agent. She's not like she's scared. She's trapped in the basement with him. It's dark. He's stalking her. That was true horror done really well. When he strings up the guard in the cell, but he's in a cell, he strings the guard up in the cell and makes it like a fucking whatever they call panorama or pantif or whatever. There's a word for this. It's like a motif or whatever. He does like a motif of like an angel with a dead body of the guard that he kills, so that that it's Hannibal Lecter and he's a genius, and for him it's about the art, which is even more sickening. And you're like, what the fuck? He's doing this because he's really, really sick, and he has to like vogue for the fucking Frasier crowd, and do a panorama, a panopic of like a dead body into an angel in his jail cell that he escapes with just like a few sentences. He just talks them right out of the key and walks out of that place, which is like this guy's a true monster. He's smarter than everybody around him. He knows what buttons to pull and what strings to pull. That was good horror. And it's weird because I would say the best horror, I would say the people best at horror is actually the Japanese, but I don't think of Japanese video games as being very scary. Like I don't like when I first played Silent Hill, I still had a suspended belief that it could scare me. And by Resident Evil 2 or Code Veronica, I still believe that that a game could scare me and I could get like worried, but I was more scared of losing my run and how bad that would make me feel if I was just dead in 2 hits and done. You're like, fuck, and I lost half an hour. It's not horror where you're trapped in a basement with a dude in the darkness. You got nothing but a knife, and he's got like as I recall, he's got a firearm or something nuts. He's got like a cleaver or something for what he's got, but he's got a fucking night vision goggles and you don't. And that's true horror, because then it's like what the chances of getting out of it are basically zero. So you're terrified. You're terrified for her. You're terrified of the situation. It was well written, and that is exposition in horror that is difficult to, to like it. I would say when you see it in the wild, I think the director is either a master. Like like Psycho, when it first came out, really wowed crowds because of the shower scene. That's fucking scary, because you think she's at the most vulnerable she could possibly be. She has no clothes. She's taking a shower. He's got a knife. And the Psycho theme song plays, and Hitchcock threw blood across the screen, but he didn't show the murder. He doesn't show the head exploding or the woman getting stabbed or any of that stuff. And I watched a whole bunch of stuff about what makes horror truly horror. And I think it's often your imagination. And this is something that I would say the average Japanese game or Japanese manga approach to horror, which in my experience is essentially mutation. It's almost like a Cronenberg like approach, almost we used to call it tromo. I think it's like tromo. It's like violent, like gore fests, and while I think this could apply as horror, and I've seen some fucked up movies like Feast 1 through 3. I've seen some fucked up movies. But like, I don't know, I would say, or even Last House on the Left, where you're just like, the horror of it is you witness a rape. You're like, fuck, that's fucked up, That was the horror on the Last House on the Left. It was Wes Craven, like just basically like horror storying a terrible random rape and how really terrible a random rape could be. They just picked the Last House on the Left and they just torture the whole family, and it's just fucking weird. It's like this weird wanton bloodlust movie. It's disgusting. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was scary because none of us live like that. So we all have like some concept of what hillbillies in the hills, have the hills have eyes, and there's hillbillies in the hills that have been, kind of co-breeding with each other and sort of inbreeding and drunk and sort of griftonomics a bit and sort of like hickish a bit, but not dumb. And definitely a very loyal family, but also all psychos to the one. And they're not like living off of human beings, but they're killing human beings for fun. And Leatherface is skinning them for like a panoply of like a skin murder face thing. And the initial teenagers show up and are immediately confined to like a fridge, as I recall, and then tied to a chair and tortured to watch while they feed like human remains to their grandmother who's paralyzed and sitting there, which is like what they stole for Resident Evil 7. And that's okay, but like that shock value only existed one time and they were lucky to get it then. It's really hard to make a video game deliver true horror, in my opinion. Now, you can feel really jump scared, and you can feel very nervous, and you can feel very uncomfortable that, like, you have so much investment of time and so much items that you don't want to lose or play through, or you go back to a save 45 minutes ago. Like, when you go down into the cursed mire in Dark Souls 1, that's scary. And that's good video game horror. You've gone all the way down this whole thing and you've killed like 28 or 30 fucking zombies or like skeletal guys, and there's been a couple of nasty nights and a fire breathing thing and a giant fire breathing brain, and you get to the bottom. and you can't find, and the first time you do it anyways, and you can't find a save point, and it's occurred to you that it occurs to everyone that it's been like 45 to, it takes like 50 minutes to methodically kill each guy when you're first playing the game, and you're not like you're not like a Souls-like master like I am now. I'd say I'm not a master, but I'm good at it. Like, and so your skills are good, but they're not enough to carry you through the AI totally all the time, and so you're like fighting each mob very carefully and taking your time and blocking and all this stuff. And Dark Souls felt really good horror wise like that. And like by the end of it, you're like, I don't know, I kind of digress, but it's like there's a difference between that psychological horror where your mind fills in the blanks and like what they deliver in an action horror game. And I've grown to have a distaste for it. And the last one that I liked was The Plague Tale: Innocence and Requiem, but Requiem to a lesser degree than the Innocence, because after I hadn't seen Innocence yet, but once I had seen Innocence, Requiem was less interesting to me. But it was also a better game, I think. So, but whatever. That was good, but it wasn't really good horror. It was just creepy watching rats like completely demolish a person like piranhas. They were like piranha rats. They would just swallow people alive, And while it was scary, it wasn't like true splatterhouse horror cinema where there's like a killer robot in Terminator 2. And he's crashed a helicopter and he's in the back of your SWAT van and he's fallen behind, but he's now taken over a truck and he's kicked the driver out and he's driving the truck towards you and he's got a semi now and you're driving like a SWAT van. It's like, no, it won't really hold up to a semi, and he's starting to ram the back of the van, and you're like, fuck, he's gonna get us here. He's gonna get us. And she gets shot and she's like, ah, and John Connor's like, no, mom. And she's like, fuck him, I'm fighting him. And she gets back there and she kicks the fucking door open and Shane guns his ass, as I recall. And or no, I think actually it was Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger's T2, the T1000 or whatever, the T200. He like, he makes his final stand, and then it doesn't end. They end up they crash into the factory in the liquid nitrogen truck, and every bit of it has been plausible. You believe that it could have happened because none of it suspends belief. None of it really is physically impossible. What happens in that story of T2, which I've always really appreciated, it's all stuff that, besides the Terminators, of course, like most of the action is stuff that could happen in real life. That's very terrifying. Like, oh, he just drove the semi off a fucking bridge so he could continue to try and smash it into you. And it goes crunch, 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 and then it levels out, and it's still rolling. So he just shifts up, and gets it going again, and he's back at you like some kind of crazy psycho Terminator machine that won't stop. And the factory in the first one was exactly the same way. And by the end of it, you stabbed a spear through his heart, and he's like crackling with energy, and he's still climbing at you, and it embodies like that terrible idea of what happens when a man or a being or a Terminator or something just fixates on you and decides that either you or him must die. That was good horror. This and I felt Alien Isolation did that well the first time I saw it. I did not think RE7 did it well. And Isolation was a scary as fuck game for me the first time I played it. I was just out. I was just like, man, it was tense for me. I had a 7.1 surround sound headphones and stuff, and I wasn't on stream, so I could just totally immerse in it. And I set it on extreme, and I beat that twice, and I did it on extreme, and it was really fucking scary. On extreme, it was extremely scary because you can't beat him. You can't even deter him, on extreme. You just can't aggro. So eventually, you hear this like clunk, 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 Dunk. And you realize that he just dropped out of the vent about 18 feet over to the northeast, and you're trying to go south. So you keep going, and you're like, fuck, I've got like 9 seconds before he rounds the corner and scans the hallway, because it is actively fucking hunting you. It's like actively hunting you, and it hears you. Even on, especially on extreme, it hears you. It hears you, and it's coming to your quadrant. And yet where you hide before it just gives up in frustration and leaves, like a cat hunting a mouse, right? And that was scary. These manga games where, like, 7 was such a manga game. Like, I thought it was going to be about the fucking, about the mansion. But then it turns into, like, a nuclear situation with the town outside of it. And, I mean, it was all, like, Resident Evil was always like that. But it didn't need to be like that. I felt that the had they just kept going with the motifs of the mansion, they would have made a true horror classic. But then they go into that weird extreme thing he talked about. Instead of extreme, it's extreme with a giant X, right? They do this extreme exposition thing where they're like, oh, whoever saves the town, it's whoever saves the world. Code Veronica is saved, or whatever, everybody, and there's this giant savior complex thing. And I always thought it would have been better if they just walk out the back door. I always thought that would have been a better ending for those Resident Evil Mansion games. It's like, and that's how 1 was. One was like that. By the time you're out of it at the end, and you fight the bottom thing in the basement, I think, and you get out, and you're like, fuck it, I'm not that far from the front door. And the whole thing was so terrible, and it took like 26 hours to clear it, and I didn't know it, so I had to learn and all this stuff. And there were so many terrible moments where I got like a fucking like a thing's tail shoved through my heart, or a zombie bit into my neck, or something like that. And you're like, fuck, this was genuinely scary, and it ended right about where it started. Now 7 stayed true to that formula, but then, like, by the end of it, it was frankly a fucking joke. I felt like Code Veronica kind of at least kept its like it's like really cold-hearted nature, Like now, like honestly, the village bores me. I want to hear one of them talk about. I wonder if Monty Xander did Code Veronica. Let's see, Monty Xander. He seems like a Resident Evil fiend. Let's see. Did you do Code Veronica? Right. Let's see. No, Witch Taunter did that. Oh, Monty said, yeah, he did the Bioshock critique. So I can't get this guy, but let's look at the Code Veronica X retrospective, right, from a year ago. He got some hits with this. Maybe I should actually do a view count, though. I hate this element of my nature, but I mean, like, I don't know if I'm gonna do that. Okay, why would the filter get nothing? You're stupid. Okay, I don't want his name on it. I want Resident Evil Code Veronica. I don't know. I just want to see what pops. Yeah, the remaster, right? So this wasn't that great of a game, but it was super good for its time. And it's kind of sucked compared to like 1 and 2, but it was thorough and good. And I don't want like a let's play. I want to look at somebody talk about it. Yeah, this guy. Here we go. And so Code Veronica was kind of an interesting monster because it left the mansion. It was a mansion game for the first. It was a really tense mansion game for the first, like, I don't know, 8 hours. But then there's this point where the lead characters are like blown off in a jet to Antarctica. And now this exposition, the first time they did it, or not exposition, but this delivery, the first time they did it was okay. And it was interesting, and it was definitely entertaining, I would say. Going to Antarctica and fighting the things in the frozen areas was really good. It was entertaining. But it was also sort of like, why did we leave the mansion? And 7 also suffer from this really bad. And I consider 8 to be like, oh, we full blown have left the mansion and we're in a manga comic now. And what made Resident Evil truly great was this idea that in the mansion was the death of the entire world, and you're the hero who makes sure that secret is safe holded, and that the umbrella virus doesn't go out and COVID the whole world, and suddenly the entire world's zombies, and all that's up to you, Chris Redfield or Leon, whatever. It was good, But by 4. They had done so much traveling and so much just like, it's kind of like when television shows go to foreign countries in their like 7th season and you're like, oh, we've killed the writers are tired of this premise and they're sick of the box and they want to see Gilligan meet the Green Acres cast, or they want to see, Homer go to Australia, They want to go see Homer Goes to Australia is an excellent example of this, and they did a lot of tongue in cheek when they did it, but that was the last time you could probably get away with stuff like that. Oh, we're sending the Simpsons to the Australia. We're sending the Simpsons to Disney World. What happens when the Simpsons go to this or that, right? And so that's kind of like what they did with Code Veronica, and when Code Veronica was resoundingly successful on the Dreamcast, it was, and the PlayStation 2. It was like the public had basically somehow silently signed up for like the enshittification of Resident Evil, where it was cool, this idea that you get out of the mansion or you leave it briefly at the end of the game and you're suddenly fighting like a boss that's like the size of a mountain or something like that. It's okay for them to do this. They're horror directors. It's okay for them to do that. It's their baby. They can write it. I'm not a hater. They can write it that way. But I'm not sure that's the nature of what made them famous in the first place. And I want to see the Resident Evil character go to Antarctica, but it's also a suspension of the original themology that we all struggle with. And Code Veronica didn't do so well in sales because of it. It was a good game, but 3 tanked worse than Resident Evil 3 tanked really, really bad, and it should have. Nemesis was not that great in my opinion. And I know that's sacrilege, but whatever. That's because the younger generation liked it too much. But honestly, it wasn't good compared to Resident Evil 1 and 2. It was not like a prototype game like 1 and 2 were. And 3 was kind of a failure, so they knew they had to do something. So they did Code Veronica on the Dreamcast right before Resident Evil 4 on the I think that was like when the Wii came. Resident Evil 4 on the Wii and the PlayStation 2, and then eventually 360 and PlayStation 3. And I gotta go check my ore here. And leaving the mansion's cool. I don't hate on their ability to do that with their story. It's good to think outside the box. But that's not the themology that put them there and brought all the money home to the bank in the first place. And we all struggle with this. And 7, like, I'm sorry, I really like Biohazard. I actually really do. I think that's a great game. I've beaten it twice. No, once. Yeah, I played it twice, beaten it once, and I did it on stream the time I beat it. I beat it last year, early in the year. I bought Resident Evil 7. And it was a good game, but 3/4 of the way, they seem to embrace this notion that it needed to go like World War Z or something, or almost like 28 Days Later. They needed it to get outside of the mansion, and this is what, in my opinion, kind of ruined the Resident Evil games. So we come seeking a Code Veronica treatise on what this guy thought about the story recap. Now, this appears to me like just a full regurgitation of the plot, which is okay because it'll be a trip down the memory lane. But I want his thoughts here at the end on on the game design decisions that they did. So let's go skip to that part because I don't wish to do a 55-minute video about Code Veronica. It's an old tanky tank controls crappy game from the Grand Theft Auto 2 era that is best left to the annals of history, to people that are addicted to retro. I would not recommend it to the modern crowd. It is a tank controls game that's, well, a high quality tank controls game and a great horror and very scary, like legitimately scary. Was in its own way a clunky piece of shit, though, like all Resident Evils. Even 7 was a clunky piece of shit, kind of. It was the best they'd ever done, but it still was the tank controls, kind of.
On the last episode of Enter the Survival Horror, I mentioned that after the
It is a female content provider. We love hearing that. Fuck yes.
release and massive success of Resident Evil 2, Capcom began working on multiple Resident Evil games. These projects were planned to release on a variety of different consoles. At this time, Capcom had around 5 different Resident Evil projects in development.
Yeah, they just dumped them. They just dumped, like,
side game Resident Evil 1.9,
that's my shit.
the light gun spin-off RE Gun Survivor, the Nintendo 64 exclusive RE0,
Yeah, there was like all these. She's gonna list all of them here. It's like, yeah, I wanted to jump in, but I don't need to. She'll say it. They dumped 5 games on the market way too fast because they were like, oh, well, we have a popcorn thriller, and it's like it's the public's fascination, like Jaws, and the kids are addicted to the what it really was. And I still feel this way. I felt this way at the time, right? I fell victim to the zombie crisis. I'm playing a zombie game right the fuck now. I mean, I fell victim to the zombie games. Like, I definitely did. But I still feel it. I still look at it as falling victim to them because the zombie apocalypse is what's interesting. And I do find the combat interesting. Something stumbling towards you slowly. I think I do like that combat. I think it's fun. So, you know, whatever, it sells, right? But I think Resident Evil themselves, while iconic, fucking amazing games that I beat many times and bought all of them and loved all of them, I still don't think they were the highest quality games. They were like these tank control games that played sort of like older PC games that were keyboard and mouse, that weren't really truly 3D. And while this game was sort of 3D, it was kind of clunky and shitty most of the time until 7. And so I wouldn't recommend this on the modern crowd unless you like that retro tank control shit, you know? It's not good. It was not a formative game. Let's put it this way. Very seldom do you see this game style ever done again. This weird tank control-y 3D sort of computer feeling, like tank controls thing. That was not repeated. Like, I hate to say this, but the world loves its Resident Evil. And all the movies and all the comic books and all the games. It's like insulting the multiverse or Marvel or something. People love that shit. And I don't care. I don't care if it's their baby or whatever. I'm just saying, right? As much love as Resident Evil got, I think what that love actually was is the zombie apocalypse theme. I don't think it's Resident Evil itself. Resident Evil was the one that was able to supply it on the video games first. Now, we've seen older versions of Resident Evil, believe it or not. And I'll show you one. Like, I mean, we've seen them. It's like Metal Gear Solid or Zombies Ate the Neighbors. Zombies Ate My Neighbors, right? Which is a 2D version of Resident Evil, essentially, on the Super Nintendo. Really, truly great game by Konami. Oh, you gotta love that sound. It's like an orgasm of meaty. They don't make them like that anymore. Why can't you make your intros like actually good? Instead, you do these long, drawn-out Bethesda things. Can't you just have it be simple like this, where it's like a second, you know? What's wrong? It's very clear what this company is. More so than your shitty Bethesda splash logos. It is. And I don't know why you can't do it simpler like this. Just do it simpler. It's like star wipe, 1 second of sound, MIDI sound, and it's over. That's all I need from you. Not this like record scratching and, you know, and all this shit, you know. Look how brief they are. And why did we lose this? See how brief that was? I want that brief. Man. Your intro splash things. So this was a really hard game, but level 14, right? 7 meals for 7 zombies. Now, this was a joke game, but it still was like zombie combat, you know? And there was another one that I really liked that was a lot like this too. It was like Uncle Fester. There was a Addams Family Uncle Fester video game. I can't remember the name of it. But this one was really fucking good. Fester's Quest, right? On the NES. Fester's Quest. And this was a great game, but it also was very difficult. And
Jesus Christ, you fuckers!
this is just a 2D version of Resident Evil. It pretty much is. It had tank controls. It played a bit more like a bullet hell, but it still had that Resident Evil kill zombies thing with shotguns.
Continue.
You know? See
What?
it?
Continue.
So Fester was just killing all these things. Like, see how it kind of looks like a bullet hell, but
Continuing. You got the same weapon and items though. Whoopity fucking do. But you start back at the beginning of the game. I can't cross where the hole is, which means I gotta go.
I would say you couldn't do an Uncle Fester game in 2024. It's just the image is something that I think would be repulsive to most parents or something like that. It's weird. Like, it's a different time now where they talk about fat shaming and all this stuff, but I think they engage in it by talking in it more about it more. They engage in it in a way. So like now this character would, I mean, I guess we can make golems, but look how bad Golem did this year. We can do Golem characters. We can do it, but
Sewers all over again.
it's kind of brave to make a main character look this ugly and fat. It's kind of brave, you know?
Deal with those green blobs again.
Fester was a wonderful character. Your uncle, he's fat, he's crazy, he's bald. He's probably murdered somebody in the South or something. You know, weird, creepy, fucking Addams Family shit. And it's just really weird that they wanted him to be a main character. And I thought it was actually kind of cool. Because he is like pretty much the weirdest, most demented fucking he didn't even really have that much of a personality, kind of. He was kind of quiet most of the time. And it was a very odd character choice. But boy, the video game was fun, you know, for its time. It was quite fun. Anyways, so you know, this Resident Evil thing of killing zombies, that's not new. I mean, this was not new when Resident Evil did it. It just made it look so cinematic that it's scary, you know?
Resident Evil 1.9, the light gun spin-off, RE Gun Survivor.
Yeah, listen to how many games they dumped within like a 2-year period or something like that. And most of them sucked, including 3.
The Nintendo 64 exclusive RE0,
RE0.
Hideki Kamiya's RE3 boat project, and finally a port of RE2 for the Sega Saturn.
RE2 for the Sega Saturn. Why? The system was so old at that point. Could it even handle it? Can it even do the FMV video? I mean, yeah, I knew that the Atari could, but the Sega Saturn can handle the video. It definitely could, but it would chug, you know. I don't know why they would need to put Resident Evil 2 on a Sega Saturn. Who the fuck had a Sega Saturn by the time Resident Evil 2 was popular? People with too much money. That's who. I'll say it like it is. That's who. Fucking Resident Evil 2 on the fucking Sega Saturn makes me laugh. That's kind of like a turn around turn 360 joke or something. That's kind of funny. It's Resident Evil 2 on the Sega Saturn. That's like putting Grand Theft Auto 5 on the PlayStation 1. Why bother? I suppose you could just turn it down really, 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 really bad until it looked no, you couldn't. I mean, until it looked like, you know, Grand Theft Auto 3, and you might get it to work. But I mean, yeah, like why would you try to put Grand Theft Auto 5 on the PlayStation 1? That just makes no sense. It's just like, why? It's silly when she should have said something about it. What she was saying is actually very, very funny, but she missed it. She's a good video game nerd, but she missed it.
Be a massive strain on the team's development.
She missed a great punchline. I can't believe they put Resident Evil 2 on the Sega Saturn. In what year? I gotta wonder, is it like 2004? So, I mean, what's the point of that? Nobody had a Sega Saturn in 7 years or something. What was the point? I don't know. I don't know why they do stuff like this. They waste so much money sometimes on their experiments, but at least they try. We gotta love them, right? You don't want to be the contender on, or so you don't want to be the spectator. You want to you want to be the contender. Contender makes an experiment and takes a swing. You miss 100% of the shots you don't make. So, if they want to, they want to put. They want to put Grand Theft Auto 5 on the PlayStation 1. Go right ahead. See if you can make that work. I kind of doubt it. Oh, I mean, now the Sega Saturn had the 32-bit processor. I just don't think it had the hard drive or the capability, really. It was such an old system.
Big development struggles for most of these titles. As
Yeah,
we know
development
now,
struggles,
RE0's
yeah.
development would be put on hold and later resumed
Wow.
on the Nintendo GameCube years
Yeah, it looked way better on the GameCube, but it also lost its, like, when it looks super graphically beautiful like this, it was more fun to play it, and but it was the same tank controls, and with all that definition, like, you can see all the squares and the doilies on the fucking chairs or whatever, with all that detail, lost its like core grittiness or something. It lost some value. Now, I liked the GameCube Resident Evil remake. It was okay, but it also lost some of its value in the respect that, like, it wasn't as gritty. I lost my mouse again. Why do you do this to me? Please don't do this to me. Or maybe my mouse died? Is that what's going on? No, it's rust messing with my shit. No, it is. My mouse died. Aw. Well, you lasted a while. I don't know. I think I've got a AA battery up there. Yeah, I do. I'll be right back, guys. Sorry, my mouse died. I have gamer problem. It's called brain damage. Okay, we're back in it. Sorry about that. Okay, we go all the way southeast, all the way to the 6s, which is annoying. We'll get that one. It's gonna take a while. Oh, I'm full again. More money. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we go home.
Warp drive.
Oh,
active.
I have not picked up my mobile tractor yet, and I kind of want to go get it.
Kamiya's RE3 transitioned into a plethora of game ideas until finally becoming Devil May Cry. RE 1.9 ended up becoming RE3 Nemesis, and surprisingly, Gun Survivor released on time without any problems. That leaves us with the Sega Saturn port of RE2. This port was overseen by series director and producer Shinji Mikami. While in development, Mikami and his team realized that the Saturn's power wouldn't be enough to properly
I called it, right? Was I right? I was right.
port RE2 without making some.
That's like putting Grand Theft Auto 5 on the PlayStation 1. It's an apt analogy. Why would it made me laugh when she said she didn't miss it. She did not miss the punchline. I thought she completely missed it. She did not. That's good. Hey, what's up with you, bitch? You won't die. I will fuck you up. I mean, don't come to the Alliance Town. I don't come to the Whore Town. Sorry. That engagement was more entertaining to me than those idiots who rated me, unfortunately. I wish I got the same endorphins when idiots acted like idiots, you know? If I could just laugh at them and actually like enjoy it, you know, I wish I could do that. But I enjoy what just happened a lot more than those idiots rating me, which is so stupid. There should be something that I want to do, you know.
That would have affected the game's overall.
What was that?
quality
That
in
was
negative way.
that was somebody breaking my stealth. That was a rogue breaking my stealth. Wait, come back. Some kind of rogue. Yeah, jump that druid. Jump the druid. Jump the druid. No, something's going on here. It might have been him. He might have thought it was me. He probably knew it was me. I missed him. I missed it because I was AFK. Oh, I've got to get Omen up, and it's not on my bar, and that annoys the fuck out of me. Yeah, that's pretty annoying, man. I need you to actually do that. I don't like buffs, but at least it's a buff that isn't poison, you know? Stupid buffs. I feel like I have the power now. I didn't even bleed that guy and he fucking got wasted. This gear is better now. Now I have like double the agility I used to have. Let's see how we do. See what kind of damage I can do. I'm gonna kill this deer just to see. Why aren't... Oh, because I don't have the rune? I don't have the rune. Oh, duh. Oops. Right. I forgot my runes. So, what do we got here? We got runes. We got Savage Roar on the legs. Living Seed on the chest. Because I don't want to stand there in range. I don't think. Mangle on the hands. Or is it Lacerate? Lacerate or Mangle? It's Mangle. Yeah, it's Mangle. So Mangle and Savage Roar. No, wait. Wish I had Live Bloom, kind of. Almost more than Savage Roar. I mean, yeah, it is super good. Oh, what's this? I don't know why he didn't jump me, but okay.
whose Saturn would end up being cancelled, leaving a lot of Sega fans who enjoyed the Saturn version of RE1 in the dust. Shortly after this game's cancellation, Mikami was
RE1 makes sense. Code Veronica doesn't.
Making a Resident Evil game for Sega in the future. Mikami and his team quickly came up with some new ideas and thought to
Let me get
apply them to
some
the
water.
upcoming Sega Dreamcast
Or beer. I'm
console.
gonna get some
With
beer.
this new goal in mind, the idea of Code Veronica was born. A Resident Evil side game directed by RE1 designer Hiroki Kato. CV and RE3 would be developed at the same time and released only 1 year apart. This has often led many people to speculate and theorize that CV was actually supposed to be the original RE3. This is a common misconception. Even though the story of Code Veronica would be continuing Claire Redfield's story from RE2, this game from day one was always intended to be a side game released exclusively for the Dreamcast. At this time, the PS2's release date would be pushed back along with RE3's development. Capcom didn't want PlayStation players to feel like they had to wait or buy a new console just to get the next mainline entry to the series. Since Kamiya's RE3 idea wasn't working out on PS1, the Raccoon City spin-off game RE1.9 was then promoted to mainline status and lives on as RE3 Nemesis. I thought I should make this point clear because I see a lot of people online bringing up CV being the true or original RE3. It was always meant to be a Dreamcast game alongside RE3's PS1 release. With that being said, the story of CV is a continuation of Claire Redfield's story from Resident Evil 2, and when RE2 released on Dreamcast in Japan, the game included a playable demo of Code Veronica to get Dreamcast owners caught up on Claire's story. 1 year after CV's release, an updated version of the game would come out on PS2. Resident Evil Code Veronica X. Capcom's reasoning for bringing CV to the PS2 is because they felt that the game would have a much bigger reception on PS2 because the Dreamcast player base was much smaller in comparison to Sony's new console. A very understandable change from a business perspective. The X version of Code Veronica includes additional story events and extended cutscenes. I'll be talking about this version in today's video because I played this one first and I no longer own a Dreamcast, so I couldn't play the original CV for this video anyway. I have a pretty deep history with Code Veronica, so I'm excited to talk about it. It's a very strange and interesting
me too.
Resident Evil game. So without further ado, let's go on the wild ride that is Resident Evil Code Veronica. Code Veronica's gameplay is pretty much the same as the first 3 games that came before it, using fixed camera angles, tank controls, and the light lock-on aiming system that we're all super familiar with. There are some new things that CV adds to the RE gameplay formula, but it doesn't do a whole lot new gameplay-wise. So why don't we save the gameplay for a little bit later and talk about CV's most obvious change from previous titles, its presentation. Taking full advantage of the Dreamcast's hardware, Code Veronica's game world is now 100% 3D rendered. That's right, no pre-rendered backgrounds in this game. With a fully 3D world, Code Veronica features a bunch of environments that have moving camera angles. As you play, the camera will pan and sometimes swoop in and out of locations, showing you other parts of the environment instead of having hard cuts between camera angles. This is an excellent way of using the console's hardware and gives this game a much more cinematic feel. Camera transitions are also instant thanks to this game having a 3D world. In the original games, the PS1 had to quickly find and load each pre-rendered background as you ran through the camera changes. This would sometimes cause a delay in game flow and was very noticeable once you saw the camera freeze for the first time trying to change the background. It's like impossible to unsee. Having camera changes be instant makes CV's gameplay flow so much faster than its predecessors. The step to full 3D isn't the only new graphical addition that Code Veronica brings to the table. This game also features a new lighting engine that looked really great for its time. In certain areas of the game, lighting will be extremely limited. You'll have to restore the power to these areas or use your lighter to illuminate your surroundings. In dark rooms, you'll even find hidden valuable items.
Yeah, it was
that are extremely
scary.
hard to spot without a light source. Not only is the dynamic lighting great from a graphical standpoint, but it's also really immersive.
Oh.
It sets the dark tone of the game very well. I feel the dark areas are used perfectly in this title. It's not like you're walking around the entire game in complete darkness. There are only a few areas like this at the beginning and later parts of the game, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's cool. Even though I think this game's 3D graphics are still impressive, it's safe to say that the quality of the environments isn't too consistent. Some rooms are densely detailed with a lot of objects, but then there are also rooms that look really clean, gray, and unfortunately, lifeless. It's understandable because of the time this game was released and it being the first fully 3D rendered RE game on brand new hardware. With that said, I have to give the game credit because there are some great looking and memorable locales in this game, and I'll be talking more about them in the story portion of this video. Other than the environments, I think the character animation sadly hasn't aged too well. As I said, this was the first RE game that released on new hardware and used graphical tech that was very of its time.
This girl's my
The
age.
visuals ended up looking very jerky and robotic.
She knows her
especially the
stuff. She's like right my age. She's probably like 42. Yeah, she's doing well too. Thank you, the Spear Hunter, for the excellent content for my stream. I've liked and subbed to your channel.
Animating turn animation. The leg move.
Something I had to accept about my job that was really difficult for me, is still difficult for me to accept, right? Is I'm not really a nice person like these people. I'm a good person like these people, but I'm not a nice person like these people. And I think they easily pull in lots of attention just being sunny and likable. And I have elements in that in my personality, I do. But I don't live there. And
Docking request.
I could be a very mean person, I think. And I see that as a difference between me and people like this. One of the reasons why they're like, you know, very famous. I don't know if I'll ever have numbers like that. I fucking doubt it. I doubt it. Maybe. I don't know. I need a pickaxe. Oh, I have an available point, huh? Unlocks in 4. Yeah, that's okay. We'll go. More money. More money.
Is so subtle that it just looks like Claire is turntabling like some kind of creepy animatronic. I remember thinking it looked bad even back when the game first released. The cutscenes feel better because for CV the devs used an early version of motion capture, so most of the cutscenes have fluid and realistic movement. But, you know, as realistic as they can get for the time. I think the character models in this game look pretty good in cutscenes. Like many other games of this time period, Code Veronica's characters have two models. One when you're out in the field and another for cutscenes. The faces on the cutscene models look great, but once the scene is over, the character will instantly switch back to a lower poly model with a very PS1 looking face. This isn't really a complaint for me. I actually really like this about older games. This used to happen a lot in PS2 and Dreamcast games. It's super interesting, and it sort of marks the time period this game was made in. Overall, I think CV's graphics are okay, but haven't aged well. They were cutting edge for the time and the perfect evolution to RE1 through 3's graphics. I should also say that even though I think they haven't aged well, that doesn't mean I think they're bad. This look is extremely charming. I love early Dreamcast and PS2 games for their of-the-time next-gen look. I still prefer pre-rendered backgrounds because they tend to look good for a very long time, and you can get a lot out of them for very little system power costs. Maybe later in the series, Capcom may return to pre-rendered backgrounds. We'll just have to wait and see. Okay, let's talk about the few new things CD does with its gameplay. So I've already mentioned the new equipable loader, but obviously there's some other new things that you can equip, like Code Veronica's new dual-wielding weapon options. So I'm kinda torn on this edition. It's cool having the ability to dual fire Uzis and pistols, but I always thought it was kind of immersion breaking when using these weapons. Don't get me wrong, it feels great having the ability to lock onto 2 different enemies and firing away, but there's something so cartoony and animated about it. There's a particular character that recklessly uses 2 guns at once, and it just feels very silly to me. Like, he strikes anime poses, which feels very not Resident Evil in my mind. Another new gameplay addition is the ability to retry for death. So when you die in this game, instead of getting kicked back to the main menu, you can choose to start from your last save point right away, cutting down on the hassle of reloading your game. This is great because it definitely could get annoying in the previous games when you'd encounter a difficult situation where you'd die over and over, forcing you to spend a lot of time restarting and looking at the same save and load screens. The retry system fixes this inconvenience. There are also certain parts of the game that will give you a checkpoint instead of sending you back to your last save. This extends to some of the late game boss encounters. If you die during these fights, the game will place you at the start of the battle instead of your last save. We'll talk about these scenarios later because, believe it or not, I may have a slight problem with some of these checkpoints. I promise, you will understand what I mean. Other than those two big additions, there isn't much else that CV does that separate it from RE's 1 through 3 gameplay-wise. There are, of course, some smaller things like the ability to use green herbs on pickup when your inventory is full, and having all of the weapons from RE2 being accessible in this title. The shotgun, grenade launcher, bowgun, and magnum make their return for this game, along with upgrades for specific guns and a variety of new firearms, like an assault rifle and the dual-wielded weapons that I mentioned from before. You get a lot of weapon variety in CV, and it's cool because all of these guns are usable by all of the playable characters. Nothing is exclusively locked to a certain campaign, like the first 3 games did with its characters. The difficulty in Code Veronica is interesting. So normal combat situations throughout most of CV aren't too difficult if you're used to playing survival horror games. The enemies you'll be encountering are tough, and they respawn when you come back to a room that you've cleared out. Zombies travel in large groups, but also move around predictably, and their pathfinding AI can be manipulated quite easily, allowing you to slip right past them. Claire's HP has also been rebalanced in this game. Like, she can take way more damage than she was able to in RE2. And it makes sense because you'll be dealing with a lot of zombies in this game. In some cases, it's best to muscle your way through a crowd of zombies, taking a bite or two, but also pushing your aggressors back can prove very useful in saving your ammo for later. Which, by the way, saving your resources is very important in this game. Like, more than it was in the earlier entries, because most of CV's challenge comes with its boss encounters. I'm not lying when I say that these bosses can be game-ending if you don't play carefully enough in the game's opening hours. We'll talk about it when we get there, but yeah, these bosses are the dictionary definition of progression roadblock. I find it weird that CV and RE3 were both in development at the same time, but CV doesn't use some of the features that were introduced in RE3, like that game's reloading tool and ammo crafting system. I liked the ammo crafting in 3, so it's pretty disappointing that CV doesn't have this feature. It was really fun saving up gunpowder and combining it all to make enhanced and brand new types of ammo. In a lot of cases, crafting would end up making your game a bit easier, which felt rewarding when you take advantage of it in the early game, resulting in smoother boss fights towards the end of the game. It sort of removes a layer of strategy in CV. It would have been cool to see, especially since the game has the most enemy encounters out of the first 4 Resident Evil games. Admittedly, it's a pretty minor letdown for me, but it still would have been great to see included in CV. The 180 quick turn from RE3 is thankfully in this game, but having the ability to freely move up and down stairs oddly isn't in this game. Much like RE1 and 2, you have to press a button to auto walk up and down stairs again. This is a gameplay downgrade for sure. It felt like we'd be getting more free movement after RE3, but I guess not. It's weird because in Code Veronica, enemies can still move up and down stairs as they did in RE3, but they also enter a rigid stair climbing animation like you do. I don't know what to say other than it's strange that the devs did this instead of doing what their fellow RE3 devs were doing. This might have something to do with the Dreamcast's hardware, but I'm not sure. RE3's emergency evade also doesn't show up in CV, and I'm glad it doesn't because it didn't work that well and was super inconsistent, so thankfully that's not a loss on this game's part. CV has fine gameplay, but it's not as groundbreaking as RE2 or 3 was. I'll go into specifics shortly, but I'll say for now, if you're already a fan of these types of games, you can easily apply a lot of what you know about survival horror to your planning, dodging monsters, and doing all of that good Resident Evil stuff. Okay, let's get to the part that I'm most excited to talk about. Let's take an extended look at Code Veronica's wild story. Code Veronica's story begins where RE2's ended. After Leon, Claire, and Sherry escape from Raccoon City, Claire continues her search for her brother Chris. After searching for 3 months, Claire's investigation leads her